い全国大会目指して頑張ってみたいかあの若い頃の気持ちを取り戻せたら良いのにもしよろしければ行きましょうか願いが叶う街にその時間楽しい年に行くもしかして知ってるのやのととすがり出会う山のって答えそうかもしれない知りて素晴らしいものそれは救いの神道だ我々の忘れおいでこれは愛の告白願って忘れましょう成長の苦悩世界を恋になり雨のアウハウと叫んで気合い入れよう願いの願うの今日の今日のベケーション今日
Hello and welcome to Japanimation Station's Kyoto Vacation, an anime podcast brought to you by the folks at the Weekly Stuff Podcast. I'm Sean Chapman.
And I'm Jonathan Lack.
And we are here to kick back, relax, and talk about some anime this week on the show. We are living up to that tagline I've given this season because we are talking about the most chill-ass anime of all time, Lucky Star. One of the great original slice-of-life anime, and in some ways a follow-up kind of to the Melancholy of Suzumiya Haruhi. That's why we've kind of stuck it in our When Christmas Came to Otaku Town, the Melancholy of Suzumiya Haruhi season, because it's, man, there's a lot of fucking Haruhi in this show too, but Lucky Star is a great anime, one of my favorites when I originally watched it. It's the first time I've rewatched it, and I think it is still one of the best slice-of-life anime I have seen.
Absolutely. I really adored this show. I think it is fantastic. I love the way it is structured. I think the individual, obviously, jokes and characters and all of that is delightful. It is just a big old treat of a show, but I am glad we watched it in conjunction with Suzumiya Haruhi, because I think the show would be slightly incomprehensible at times if you didn't, because it is very much a show about the world Haruhi helped make in terms of anime fandom. So that is something to talk about.
Yes, it is dense with references, and a lot of those are KyoAni has sort of like created lots of weird meta references and stuff in this show. Like, one of the things that I love about this show that sets it apart from a lot of other slice of lives is that it has a very weird surreal streak to it.
Yes.
And it will get fucking weird in places, and it's fantastic.
Yeah, like, I know this definitely falls under the banner of slice of life, but there's something about that, like, genre label that I slightly bristle at, just because it is so aggressively weird and fourth wall breaking, and, like, it is and it isn't, and it is very much, there is no show like Lucky Star. Lucky Star is very much its own weird slice of tea.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It is still unsurpassed in many ways, and I absolutely adore it. Like, this is a show I've been wanting to rewatch for a long time. I had it kind of lined up to watch, and then we started doing Japanimation Station. I was like, let me put that to the side, and we will get to it. I'm very glad we got to it, because holy shit, it's so good. And I'm really glad we finally get to talk about an anime like this on the podcast, because this will be very different. We've never done anything that's like a straight comedy slice of life style show. And I think that's also something I'm really excited about for this episode.
Yes, absolutely. And there's lots of behind-the-scenes stuff. We're also talking about a different kind of manga than we've generally talked about, because this is based on a yonkama, so a 4-panel, kind of like an American comic strip more kind of thing, which is not what most, we've talked about shows based on manga and light novels and visual novels, but not something quite like this, which means the show also has a structure that is very different, and I think is fun to talk about.
Yeah, that's one of the things of Lucky Star's influences. It's one of the big anime that I think cracked how to adapt this style of manga as this like specific kind of yonkama manga was becoming more popular. In Lucky Star, there are a lot of shows today that are very much following in the model of what Lucky Star kind of innovated on.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of history with this one that you have been teasing and we've been thinking about. And I've been excited to record this, both because I think this is going to be a really fun show to talk about and because I want to hear all of your research.
Yes, I mean, so this is the first time where I felt compelled to. I have a second page of research that is just dedicated to one man, and we'll get to that at the end of the history section. I think is where it makes the most sense to do that conversation. Yeah, there's a lot of history, so let's just go ahead and dive into it. So I want to go through the history of the show itself, and like the manga and everything, and then after that we will talk about the situation with the asshole Yamamoto Yutaka, as I have referred to him basically every time he's come up. But let's talk about Lucky Star and where it comes from. So the Lucky Star manga starts with the mangaka Yoshimizu Kagami, who before creating Lucky Star, worked in the games industry, and he was in the doujin scene, as happens with like all modern manga. It comes from someone who was active in the fan community, right? And worked with making doujin in circles and stuff and going to Kamike, right? So that's why there's a lot of that kind of humor there, because it's pulled from the author's actual life. And so he was active in that scene in the early 2000s when he met and befriended a man named Kato Go, who was also really active in the doujin community. That's important because Kato Go would eventually go on to become an editor and then editor-in-chief for the gaming magazine Comptic, which was a magazine published by Kadokawa, right? Like the huge book and magazine publisher in Japan. So as editor-in-chief, Kato found himself occasionally asking his buddy Yoshimizu to do some work for the magazine, like especially when it's like, oh, we've got like a couple of extra pages we need to fill, and he would kind of call him up and say, hey, can you do something for us? And for the January 2004 issue, Kato found himself with 3 extra pages for the magazine that needed to be filled because they had a serialized manga that had wrapped up, and so there were a couple of extra pages they needed. So he asked Kato to do 3 pages worth of a 4-koma manga, and that is where Lucky Star started. So it was just totally a like, hey, can you throw something together for this magazine? And that's where it comes from. Just to give people context, if you don't know what Yonkoma or 4-koma manga is, as you're kind of alluding to, Jonathan, earlier, 4-koma means 4 panels. So it's a manga style where you have 4 panels aligned vertically. And it's a very popular manga format in Japan, and it can be roughly equivalent to funny pages, things like the Calvin Hobbes, Peanuts, stuff like that. And it's not exactly like that. Usually when you think of those, you typically think of having about 1 strip in the newspaper, and that's it at a time.
And it's a daily thing. It's every day of the week. And then maybe a slightly different thing on Sundays, but it's something that you would serialize every single day.
Yeah, so it's like a 1 strip at a time kind of thing. 4-koma manga is more, you have a set number of pages, and you will have 2 vertical 4-panel strips per page. So, for instance, on that first one, they had 3 pages. That was 5 strips worth of Lucky Star. So that's one of the reasons why 4-koma manga more typically has more overarching plot lines and stuff like that than you would see in funny papers. That's kind of why it's structured out that way. Also, just as like a little trivia fact there, the 4-koma manga, the reason why it's 4 panels, that has its roots in the Kisho Tenketsu story structure we've talked about before. The like ki is the opening, shows continuation, ten is the twist, ketsu is the resolution. The reason why it's 4 is because each of those panels in a like standard format would basically follow those 4 different principles or steps of the storytelling process. So that's why it's kind of broken down that way. If people have never read 4-koma manga, it's really good. It's a cool format, and it's pretty cool. Anyways, that's Lucky Star, how it sort of starts out. And it immediately became very popular. So, it has that self-referential humor. It's got that kind of otaku side to it that when you're writing for a magazine like Comptic, that's like what that reader base was all about. And so that humor really hit them really well. And there weren't a lot of other manga quite like Lucky Star at the time. This genre was still very new at the time. And so the manga gained a larger page count pretty quickly, and then also began being serialized in sister Kadokawa magazines, Monthly Comp Ace and Monthly Shonen Ace also. So it very quickly started gaining a lot of steam. The manga ran from January 2004 to October 26, 2013, at which point it went on a long hiatus, but it has recently returned, and it has resumed serialization in November 2022. So, if you want to get new Lucky Star is happening right now. In May 2012, the manga was announced to have sold 5.5 million copies, which is a lot of copies of a Yonkoma manga. Due to its popularity, Lucky Star received lots of spin-offs and adaptations, including some that predate the anime adaptation, so there is an alternate voice cast to the KyoAni version that are present in a drama CD that was made in August 2004, as well as a Nintendo DS quiz game called Lucky Star Moe Drill, which there's actually a pretty, weird niche reference to in the anime itself at a point that was very confusing. But that game came out in December 2005. That received a sequel game called Shin Lucky Star Moe Drill Tabidachi, or Leaving on a Journey, and that came out in 2007. And there are lots of spin-off mangas, and, it's a whole sort of little media franchise in and of itself, Lucky Star.
They literally just, the month before we're recording this, there's a new spin-off manga called Konata 31 that is about the characters as adults, and I haven't read any of it yet, but that sounds fascinating, and I would love to see what they're doing with that, because it's interesting. I want to know how Konata is as a functioning, probably not functioning adult in society.
Yes, it is hilarious to me that a new spin-off manga started being created between when I started making these notes and was recording the episode. In that span of time, a new manga started coming out for Lucky Star. But that just sort of gives you context for how popular it is on the manga side. In terms of the anime, KyoAni began airing their animated adaptation of Lucky Star in April 2007. The show ran for 24 episodes, 2 cores, so went to September 16th, 2007. There's not any, sort of big stories on how that came about. KyoAni already had partnerships with Kadokawa. They'd already adapted Full Metal Panic, which is a Kadokawa production. Haruhi is as well, because Sneakers is a Kadokawa magazine. So, there's already a lot of connection there. It's the same producer at Kadokawa who handled Haruhi, also handled Lucky Star. So it was just a natural, hey, this makes sense. And KyoAni had done a lot of this kind of otaku-style humor stuff in the early 2000s. So it was just kind of a very natural, hey, this project makes a lot of sense. The series was directed for the first 4 episodes by Yamamoto Yutaka. Put a pin in that. Put a big pin in that one, and we will unpin that and let the waterfall stream out from there. But just put a pin in that one. Various elements of the manga were adjusted for the anime. So the manga starts out when all the main characters are first years in high school. In order to sort of have it be the 2 cores, and each core takes place over the course of an entire year, they updated them to be second years in high school at the beginning of the anime, so that way it ends when they're basically about to graduate high school. And there's lots of other referential humor that they updated and stuff and added in their KyoAni elements, right? So that they updated certain things about the manga. KyoAni incorporated lots and lots of self-referential humor, including references to other KyoAni shows, characters, voice actors, although obviously it doesn't stop there, because it's any Kadokawa production is not safe from the deep references. There's an episode that has the cast of Sergeant Frog, which is a Kadokawa manga that was adapted to an anime, do the next on preview for no conceivable reason other than Sergeant Frog just gets referenced a lot. So there's a lot of stuff like that. Then you also have Lucky Channel. This is a very fun thing of the background of this. So Lucky Channel, which is the weird segment that ends each of the episodes with Kagami Akira in Shiraishi Minoru, that started as an informational page that ran in Comptic. So that's where the character of Kagami Akira came from. Shiraishi Minoru was not a part of that. That is a KyoAni edition. But the Kagami Akira character came as this sort of promotional thing of, hey, here's what's coming up in this magazine that the mangaka for Lucky Star would draw. When KyoAni began developing the show, they decided to incorporate the Lucky Channel thing and that character into the show, but in a pretty innovative way. So they had a Lucky Channel radio show, right, which is very common at this point with anime, that you have a promotional radio show hosted by Kagami Akira, played by, of course, the voice actress Kono Hiromi, and then they added Shiraishi Minoru, played by Shiraishi Minoru, who is one of our sort of regular voice actors in the mix at KyoAni. He played 50 different roles on Clannad in terms of just background characters kind of thing. So he's just in a lot of KyoAni stuff. So they had him co-host that. And that began airing every week from January 2007. So that started 3 months before the show itself actually aired, and it ran for 39 episodes, basically going up to when the anime concluded. And so when the anime began airing, you would have a Lucky Channel segment at the end of each episode. So you had 3 different Lucky Channels going at the same time. You have the magazine, which has Lucky Channel. You've got the radio show, which is Lucky Channel, and you've got the anime, and those would constantly be making references across them, right? So if you just watch the anime, you'll notice like they will make references to this thing is happening in context or blah, 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 and you have no context for it. Watching it in America fucking like 15 years later or whatever. But, you know, that's kind of what all of those pieces are. And then the Lucky Channel radio show was very popular, so it actually effectively continued all throughout 2008 and just kept on getting renewed. And they also, Kogami Akira or Kono Hiromi and Shiraishi Minoru, also are the main hosts for all the different live events that they did for Lucky Star. So it's kind of like a very big part of the promotional side of the show. Similar to Haruhi, KyoAni also made a very referential promotional site. So there's which is still up, so you can see it if you want. It's called basically lucky-ch.com. It's got a Luckypedia, which is just modeled after Wikipedia, and the design of the website itself looks like an old version of Mozilla Firefox, what would have been a modern version of Mozilla Firefox when the website was made. And I love that the website is still updated. So there's like, they have like a Twitter thing that automatically updates from the like official Lucky Star Twitter account, but it is still this very 2007 ass website, and it's great. I love that that website is still what that website is. Also similar to Haruhi, Lucky Star had a huge number of character songs and albums and stuff. Like the music was a big part of the show. And so there are 13 volumes of character songs released. The show was extremely well received. It won a lot of different awards. It topped polls among fans. It's still very popular today. The first DVD volume sold 38,000 copies, and the average sale for a volume was 29,000, leading to about roughly 380,000 volumes sold in its initial run, which is not quite Haruhi Season 1 numbers, but by a substantial margin outstrips any of the other KyoAni shows we've talked about so far. Like, that is a lot. The show also saw an explosion of interest in the manga. Before the show began, the manga had sold about 600,000 copies. By March 2008, after the show finished, the series had sold over 1.8 million copies. So it basically tripled the sales of the manga over the course of its run. The show inspired fan pilgrimages. This is something we talked about with Haruhi as well. So these are where fans of the show go to places featured in the show, most notably locations in Washimiya, which is the town the show is set in, and predominantly the shrine there, Washimiya Shrine, which is where the Hiragis work as shrine maidens in the show. Fans of the show would visit the shrine and draw Lucky Star characters on the Imma plaques, which are those kind of like prayer plaques. Basically, you hang up and draw like what your prayer is on it. And people would cosplay, take pictures of the characters, all that kind of stuff. This phenomenon led to a huge increase in tourism to the city of Washimiya and an influx of money from selling Lucky Star merchandise, bringing in 42 million yen, or $380,000 in 2008 alone. In 2007, before the anime aired, about 130,000 people visited the shrine on New Year's Day for what's called Hatsumode, which is a Japanese event where you go visit the shrine on New Year's Day. In 2008, that number jumped from 130,000 to 300,000 people visited the shrine on Hatsumode, and it increased to being about like 450,000 over the next couple of years, and it kind of has hung there. Washimiya has hosted various Lucky Star events, and they have even declared the Hiragi sisters as being honorary residents in 2008. So, you know, they're there in spirit at the very least. Lucky Star has had various live events. The biggest one by far is the 2009 show Lucky Star in Budokan, It's For You. This was an over 4-hour live comedy show and concert featuring the cast and crew of the series, held in the Budokan, which is one of the largest live arenas in Japan. That event was attended by over 9,000 people. And there is also a 2012 live stage musical adaptation of Lucky Star called Lucky Star on Stage. So if you want to see live stuff, you can. And there are lots of clips of Lucky Star in Budokan on YouTube, and it is fucking hilarious. There's a lot of really good stuff from that show.
That's awesome. Yeah.
So hugely, massively popular hit. One other thing I want to talk about briefly is give context for the genre conversation here, because we're talking about this as we're using the term slice of life, right? Because that's kind of like what the English community calls the genre. But to give context for the genre, fundamentally what we call the slice of life genre of manga and anime, that basically started in 1999 with the serialization of Azumanga Daioh, which is a 4-koma manga. It's fucking great. If people have not read or seen Azumanga Daioh, it gets my highest recommendation. And Azumanga Daioh basically set in stone what the modern concept of a slice of life manga or anime is. So it's a series that has a very light comedic tone. It will have a contemporary setting, typically in a high school, or you also get workplace ones with no fantasy elements or very light fantasy elements if they exist. The cast typically will comprise primarily of moe-style female characters. Some of them, it will literally only be female characters. And there's just, seriously, there aren't any male characters around. They never talk about it. And then you'll have very simple, lightly dramatic plot lines that will basically always be designed around normal, relatable, usual annual events like Valentine's Day, the school festival, Christmas, fireworks show, summer vacation, right? And so that is sort of like the shape of how you build it out. And usually they will also take place over sometimes like the real span of time in which the manga is running, which was the case for Azumanga Daioh. Obviously, if it's a much longer running manga, they won't do that. But for some of them, it's like, nope, like we're in the winter in real life. So now we have a winter themed chapter, and it's that kind of thing. And that's sort of the basic structure of what we call the slice of life. Azumanga Daioh manga and its 2002 anime adaptation were big hits, and it inspired a large number of 4-koma manga that copied the formula. The 2005 manga Lucky Star is one of the first to really fully capitalize on that formula. So there was a big wave from about 2004 to 2008 or so where you have that kind of first run of people kind of really sort of following in the model of Azumanga Daioh. Some other very similar manga that were really big is Hidamari Sketch, and then K-On!, which obviously we will address K-On! With the anime adaptation. But that was coming out around the same time. And so then, since this genre is becoming very big, in 2006, the Japanese term for this genre kind of came into usage. These shows in Japanese are called kukike, kuki meaning atmosphere and kei just meaning type. So you can kind of think of it as like it's an atmospheric show, right? It's meant to convey how sort of like light and kind of breezy it is, because it's supposed to be very light on drama, but it's also light on comedy, right? The comedy's not like in your face, it's not intense, it's not garish. It's just meant to be this light conversational like touch. And so that's sometimes the slice of life moniker we use in English doesn't always fully apply, I feel like, because slice of life is a genre in English that pre-exists all this stuff. That goes back to like the Victorian period. But kukike or nichijou-kei can also be used. Nichijou just meaning daily life. Like that is the very specific genre type you're looking at if you're talking about in Japanese that contains Azumanga Daioh, Lucky Star, K-On!, Nonon Byori, all those kinds of shows. It's a very popular genre now. In the anime world, Lucky Star is a really defining slice of life anime because it's basically you go Azumanga Daioh, you go Lucky Star, and those two are what set the kind of standards for what this genre is like, and this genre is one of the most popular genres today. A lot of the common elements of the slice of life anime, like especially the pacing and structure, and especially the theme song, Moteke Sailor Fuku, like that is what all of the opening theme songs for all of these shows are just trying to be Moteke Sailor Fuku. So Lucky Star is hugely, hugely influential within this genre. So it's one of the reasons why it's a cool show to go back and look at, because you can see the echoes of its effect, even in stuff that's coming out right now.
Yeah, another thing I wanted to mention with this, just because I think the timeline matches up in an interesting way, is 1999, the year Azumanga Daioh starts, is also the year you have Isao Takahata's film, My Neighbor the Yamadas, which is a really interesting film. I've written about it, and I love it. And it comes from it's a Yonkoma adaptation also. That's the kind of comic it is. Not a moe-heavy kind of story. It's the comic strip, Tonari no Yamada-kun, is much more akin to like a Calvin and Hobbes or something. It's, just a very daily life with a family sort of thing, so it's a little different. Although, it eventually, after the movie came out, transitioned into being more of a moe thing, because they changed the title to be just Nanako-chan is just the name of it, and it becomes all about the little girl. So it kind of went in that direction. But I was thinking about that movie a lot, because that film, there's basically no other film like it. If you've seen it, it's got both its visuals. The only other film that looks like it is Isao Takahata's next film, The Tale of the Princess Kaguya. And I've never seen a movie that is structured like it, where it is extremely loose, and it's kind of like a feature-length version of what you would see in Lucky Star, of just a series of events with sort of very light thematizing over the course of it. And I love that about that movie. There's no other movies like that. What it did is it anticipated a major trend in television that would come on, and that's kind of this kind of thing. So I think that's also like kind of an interesting connection, just in terms of like this was in the air at that time, even among, venerable old anime types like Isao Takahata.
Yeah, because it's broadly like the bigger genre that you're talking about with this kind of stuff is also would be called Iyashike. Iyashi means to like be soothed by something. And so I think that's like really what you're looking at, is like this impulse of wanting to see something that is very light, very kind of like, it's like the TV equivalent of eating marshmallows or something, or like cotton candy. Like it just sort of melts in your mouth. You just sort of suffuse yourself in it, and you're meant to be soothed by the experience of engaging with the sort of comic and lightly dramatic daily lives of people that are very recognizable to yourself. And the exact way in which that is structured and told, I think, is very peculiar and very particular to this genre. Like, it's not, like, the closest thing you can think of in American media is something like a sitcom, but it's not exactly the same thing, right? That's doing a similar, like, here's people meant to reflect the audience. You're meant to see yourselves in this family that you're watching, in the sort of, like, wacky hijinks they get up to. But sitcoms are far more heightened. Whereas these shows, Lucky Star can get surreal in lots of places, but the majority of Lucky Star is just watching people have very normal conversations that are like me overhearing my students talking in class. Like, truly, it's not that different than just the way that people just talk to each other, and people are funny. So you're just kind of engaging in that and being soothed by that sort of regular daily life. And I think you see a lot of, like, how that reflects with the sense of sort of stress and pressure that people, particularly adults, feel in society, and wanting this thing to, like, kind of soothe you and be this very relaxing experience. And I think that's one of the instincts that make it a very popular genre, is like, you want to kind of come home from a very stressful day and just kind of turn your brain off and sort of melt into whatever this piece of fiction is. And that's kind of the role that these things play in the world and in society.
Yeah, and I think structurally, I think of, like, the American sitcom type is much more of you're going to have an A plot and you're going to have a B plot, and maybe more than that, and you're going to divvy up the cast, and they're going to have some kind of, like, goal or conflict over the course of the episode that will resolve at the end, and that's sort of the way that's structured. And Lucky Star and My Neighbor the Yamadas and Ozymandias and all of these are much more vignette focused. And the way I would describe it, I was writing this down to myself in one of the early episodes. I think it was after I watched episode 7, which I think might be my favorite of the show. But, like, I think really good episodes of Lucky Star. I think the movie My Neighbor the Yamadas is like this. I think some other slice of life shows I've seen do this. It kind of feels like jazz a little bit, in the sense of, like, kind of pick a broad theme for your episode, and then you just kind of pass it around and play with it and develop it, and it just kind of bounces around the cast, and it bounces around to different scenarios, and you just kind of, like, over the course of the episode, and by the end of the episode, you're not even in the same theme anymore, you've just gone on to something else. And there's that kind of, like, it does feel more akin, almost structurally, to a piece of music than, like, a forward-moving narrative sort of thing. And that's something I think can be very fun about this kind of show. Which is to say, like, it's both structurally looser and in some ways actually very structurally rigorous, which is something I find fascinating about something like this.
Yes, because a lot of that is borrowed from that four-koma structure, because like, one of the functions of Kisho Tenketsu as a plot type is that you do not need to have a sort of, like, literal conflict. You have an implied conflict through the structure of the story, not through the events of the story. So when we think of plot in a traditional Western sense, we think of conflict as being a lot of people think of conflict as being a mandatory part of the story, that you have to put a conflict in the story as an event, as, like, a thing that the characters experience and engage with. And I think that that's also, like, not a good reading really of what conflict should be, pulling it from, like, the Greek sources and stuff like that. But that's what a lot of people think about and how we talk about storytelling a lot in America and stuff. Whereas Kisho Tenketsu, there is a fundamental conflict built into the model of the story itself. It's not necessarily conflict that's experienced by the characters. It's the conflict, conflict is a broad word I'm using here, but it's the energy in the story and the contrast in the story you're feeling by that shift from that first story thread to the twist of the 10, right? And so if you look at a 4-koma manga, the standard format of a 4-koma manga will have the third panel be a twist, and that's represented visually by having a very different image. So the first two panels will be very visually similar most of the time, and then the third panel will have, like, a camera cut or a shift to focus on a different character. Right? Maybe, like, panel 1 is character A talking, panel 2 is character A talking to themselves, panel 3 shows character B. You have not seen character B, you've had no context for character B. Panel 4 shows you character A and B together. That shift in perspective creates a contrast in the reader that is, in effect, the conflict that you're looking for from that kind of storytelling model. And so I think that's one of the things that gives the sense of structure to something like a Lucky Star, is that there is a sort of really powerful plot spine coming from that Kishin Tenketsu structure, but that's being inserted into this larger format that is much more freeform and able to move and talk about whatever it wants to and cut wildly between very different little vignettes. But because that core spine of each vignette is very disciplined in how it structures itself, you never feel truly lost. And I think that's one of like the key components that allows Japanese storytellers to engage in this, because there's a storytelling tradition that leads up to it in a way that in the West, like inevitably sitcoms are going to want to have conflict, right? People talk about Seinfeld as a show that is about nothing, but it's not, because it has like episodes of Seinfeld have traditional plot structures and have conflict and have all like climax and all those things. Whereas like if you're trying to plot a thing of Lucky Star onto a traditional rising action climax, falling action resolution, like they're not really going to match to that very easily, because there isn't any conflict, because it's just characters chatting with each other.
Exactly. And like, I think a result of this that's interesting for me is that I find exhausting is the wrong word. I think these episodes, like it took me a little longer to watch this show than any of the other shows we've watched. And that is not in any way a reflection on my feelings on its quality. It's just like, I think every episode is a fucking full course meal. It's like you get to the end of it, and I think it's it feels loose, but it is very structured, because there's a lot going on both within the vignettes and in the relationship of the vignettes. And when you get to the end, you feel like, especially because this, I think Lucky Star more than any others I've seen also has all this extra stuff in how it does the theme song and the ending and the Lucky Channel and all these other sorts of bits of the format that are very rigorous and very big and funny and fast. You get to the end of it, and you feel like you've kind of had your full meal of Lucky Star for the day, and it's hard to like binge multiple episodes, which is not the model of any American network sitcom I could name. Like, that's just not how these are structured. This is not The Office that you could sit and just watch in the background for a day. And I think that's an interesting thing about this kind of show too.
Yeah, I agree that, like, I think it typically a good slice of life show, you'd like tap out after 2, maybe 3 episodes, because yes, it's very hard to marathon because they're not built to be marathoned.
Or it's a great show to watch week to week. This is the kind of thing that, like, if you were to grasp onto one of these and have it while it's airing, this is there's some shows that are frustrating to watch week to week. I don't think Lucky Star would be one of them. I think it would be very fun to have on for that full half year,
Absolutely. Let's continue, though, with some of the history stuff here, or we're kind of out of the history, but the background. So in terms of the crew, the first 4 episodes directed by Yamamoto Yutaka. That pin is still there. Don't move the pin yet. We're about to get to it. And then, after a certain thing happens, Takemoto Yasuhiro, the great Takemoto Yasuhiro, takes over for episodes 5 to 24, which obviously he's the director for the vast majority of the show in terms of the time it's airing. So that's one of the fun things about this, is this is the first show we've watched directed by Takemoto, right? He has been very present in everything we've watched. He's directed an episode in everything we've covered. He's a very active presence in everything we've covered, but we haven't actually watched any of the shows he's directed. He's directed at this point for KyoAni, Full Metal Panic Fumofu, and Full Metal Panic: The Second Raid. And of course, he was the guy doing a lot of the OVAs and stuff they did in the lead up to them doing their first fully original productions. But that's one of the things that's fun, is that we get Takemoto, and it works for him because he's definitely got some of that really chaotic sense of humor. I think particularly comes from him. You can tell because he is the guy who directed the last section of the OVA, the pet shop part. That's him. So it's like he has that very chaotic energy. If you watch Nurse Witch Komugi-chan, it so much has this kind of like the more surreal side of Lucky Star is all over that like 3 episode OVA. The second episode of that OVA is all about Kamike and like the big building that Kamike is set in turns into a giant mech, and Nurse Witch Komugi-chan has to fight it. It's fucking nuts. So this is very much, while Yamamoto Yutaka obviously would have directed the first 4 episodes, he was obviously present for the pre-production and stuff. And Takemoto Yasuhiro would have been heavily involved in that as well, because he was involved in the show either way. But the majority of the show, I think you can really feel his influence on particularly the second half.
And from this point on, just in terms of everything we're watching, he's like kind of front and center of a lot of what's coming up, right?
Yes.
I mean, he's already been there for a lot of stuff, but he is one of the main directors or co-directors on a lot of stuff going forward. So I've been excited to kind of see his name front and center, because obviously everything we've watched that he's worked on, all the individual episodes we've always been mentioning, and yeah, one of the greats.
Yeah, because he's one of the big ones for the season 2 episodes of Haruhi and for the movie. So it's, yeah, we're about to get even more of him in the next couple weeks as well. So in terms of series composition, the writer for the series is Machida Toko. This is the only KyoAni show that she worked on, but she has a lot of writing credits. So some of the ones that stood out to me is she's one of the main writers for Idolmaster, which there's already a big KyoAni connection there anyway, so that makes sense. Wake Up Girls, which is a Yamamoto Yutaka thing he did after being fired from KyoAni. Dive, which is sort of like, I think it's Fuji TV made it, but it's like kind of like Free, the sexy swimming boys show that KyoAni made. Dive is kind of like another one of those. There were a bunch of, Free was very popular, so there were a lot of sexy swimming boys shows that happened in the mid-2010s. Then also, interestingly, she's the writer for The Disappearance of Nagato Yuki-chan, which is the spin-off. This is the anime adaptation of the spin-off manga set in an alternate universe of Haruhi, where Nagato Yuki is not an alien, but just a normal girl. So she's the writer of that as well. So she was involved in a lot of sort of like KyoAni-related productions, even though this is only KyoAni show she wrote. Other writing credits for individual episodes. Yamamoto Yutaka wrote 3 scripts for the show, with episode 10 seemingly being used more or less as is. So even though Yamamoto was no longer on the show or at KyoAni at that point, they used that script. And then he technically has a script credit for episode 23, but when you look at the credit, it says revised by Machida. So I am guessing that probably most of it would have been rewritten, because I can't imagine that script would have been totally done at that point. The original mangaka, Yoshimizu Kagami, wrote the final episode of the show, which makes a lot of sense because that is the one episode that is like, this clearly is just for the anime. Like, you can't imagine what that would have been in the manga. So they brought him in to do the last episode, which is cool. Then the writer of Full Metal Panic, Gato Shoji, who he did the Day of Sagittarius episode in Haruhi. He did 3 episodes for Lucky Star, episodes 5, 12, and 22. And this was just something I wanted to point out. This is the first thing we've covered this season that the writer Fumihiko Shimo did not work on. Everything we've covered so far has either totally been written by him or at least had a couple of episodes like in Haruhi. This is the first time that his name does not appear in the credits of a show, but that's fucking crazy. It was sad to see that. I was skimming through the Lucky Star credits being like, where is he? Come on, Shimo, you gotta be in this, and he wasn't there, and I was bummed out.
Yeah, maybe he needed to go take a nap after writing, like, literally hundreds of episodes of anime that we've talked about already this season. Yes. Yeah.
Well, because to put it into context, this would have been right when Kanon was airing and right before Clannad was started. So it's not like he wasn't working. This is just the order we're watching it. He was still writing like 50 episodes of anime, basically. So, it's fair enough that he did find time to do an episode of Lucky Star. In terms of character design and chief animation director, that is Horiguchi Yukiko. We will see her again on K-On! She's the main character design and animation director on the K-On! Series, as well as the Yamada Naoko series Tamako Market and that movie Tamako Love Story, which is a KyoAni show we're not covering. In terms of episode directors, it's a lot of the sort of like usual suspects. So Yamamoto Yutaka, the actual Yamamoto Yutaka directed episode 1. Tako Noriko did 2, 8, 15, 22. Her episodes are, I think, particularly good. Yoshioka Shinobu, 3, 9, 16, 23. He is one of the people we've only seen one thing that he did an episode direction for. And then after this, he leaves after Yamamoto Yutaka and after Lucky Star finishes to go join Yamamoto Yutaka at his new company. So, which was not a good career move because Yoshioka Shinobu has not worked on much in recent years. But this is like kind of one of the main things we've seen that he is on. Ishidate Taichi did 4 episodes, as he like always does. He like does a crazy number of episodes every show. We look at 4, 10, 17, 24. Ishihata Tatsuya did episodes 5 and 11. Takimoto Yasuhiro directed episode 6 himself, which is the beach episode, one of my favorites. And then he was the overall director for the OVA, and he did the absolute insanity of the last section of that OVA. Kagami Yoshimizu is back. We haven't seen an episode directed by him in a little bit. He did episodes 7, 14, and 18. All 3 of those are especially good. And I think, Jonathan, you shouted out episode 7 as being one of the best, and I think that is one of the best ones for sure. Kitano Hada Noriyuki, episode 12. Aratani Tomoe, 13 and 19. Sakamoto Kazuya, episode 20. Kadawaki Satoshi, 21. So again, it's a lot of like the same people we've seen doing some really good work again here. And there's almost everyone did the storyboards for the episodes that they directed. The only instance that's not true is Yamamoto Yutaka did the storyboards for episode 2. Apparently some of his storyboards for episode 18 were used because he has a credit on that episode. Takamoto Yasuhiro storyboarded episodes 12 18, which probably, like most of that I would have guessed, is his storyboards, replacing what Yamamoto Yutaka had, and he did some of the storyboards for 24, which makes sense because it's the last episode. So that's what we're looking at in terms of the crew, and I think this is probably the point at which it makes sense to rip that pin out, Jonathan.
Japanimation Station.
Oh my God, you wrote a lot of notes.
Yes.
Oh my God, just for reference for people, we work in Google Drive here. You've got your Google Sheet up, and you've got all your notes, and then at one point it just says, "Get fucked, Yamamoto Yutaka," and that is a hyperlink, and I click that hyperlink to open another Google Doc that is 4 pages long.
Yes.
So apparently this guy did some shit, and I don't know what that is, so I am excited to hear, because you have been teasing this whole season.
Yes, like literally all the way back in episode 1 when we just did the history of KyoAni, I talked about, at that point, Yamamoto Yutaka had done an interview where he talked about a supposed canceled Kagami Yoshimizu project that would have been an adaptation of Kasajizo, the Japanese folklore tale. And at that point, I couched that in, take this with a grain of salt, because while he would know if that was true or not, Yamamoto Yutaka is not the most trustworthy person on the planet. And ever since then, I've always referred to him, or tried to always refer to him, as the asshole Yamamoto Yutaka, because he's a real piece of shit. And I finally get to talk about how and why. Some of the research I did for this goes all the way back to, like, before we started doing any of these episodes. I was pulling out, I made a document that had links that I was making for when I was finding stuff to go back and visit, because it truly is insane, the story of this guy. So let's go through this. I was originally had this section titled "The Rise and Fall of Yamamoto Yutaka," and then by the time I had finished doing my research, I'm like, nah, that gives him too much. I just changed it to "Get Fucked Yamamoto Yutaka." So let's talk about "Get Fucked Yamamoto Yutaka." So Yamamoto Yutaka, he is often referred to by his nickname Yamakan. This comes from Yamamoto Kantoku. At first a term of endearment, now a term of deridement that people use to make fun of him, because he, and nothing he's directed has ever been successful. He joined Kyoto Animation's Osaka studio Animation Do in 1999, and he made his directorial debut on the 10th episode of the show Power Stone. So, he joined as an animator. He pretty quickly moved up to an episode director position. When KyoAni transitioned to working on their own original projects, Yamamoto quickly rose to prominence. He was an assistant director on the Munto OVAs, and he directed 2 episodes of Full Metal Panic Fumofu and 3 episodes of Air, which of course we covered those. And just to be clear, his episodes that he has directed are good. I'm not going to say anything bad about the episodes he made while he was at KyoAni. That stuff was well done. Obviously, he had a larger support structure that probably helped that happen. But I think in a particular context, Yamamoto Yutaka has some talent. He's just someone who doesn't know how to utilize that talent, as we will clearly see as this goes on. Yamamoto's big moment in the spotlight was when KyoAni began working on The Melancholy of Suzumiya Haruhi. He was heavily involved in the design and direction of the show, as we talked about. He had that series Inshutsu credit, that kind of weird pseudo-assistant director kind of credit, and he was heavily involved in the design and direction of that show. And he was visible in the promotion of the show as well, so this is where he became known in the fan community. If you have the Blu-rays, a lot of the Japanese extras are on the American Blu-rays as well, and you'll see he's very prominent in a lot of the behind-the-scenes stuff. So it's the fan really kind of got to know him through that, and he was very well known as being the guy who created and animated the Hare Hare Yukai ending, as well as being the one who directed the episode 0, the Miracle of Mikuru, or whatever the fuck that's called. So, at this point, he was very well known amongst the fans of KyoAni stuff. Yamamoto was seen as a rising star in the anime industry, and he was given the opportunity to direct his own show, an adaptation of the 4-koma manga series Lucky Star. Everything seemed to be going smoothly until April 30th, when one day after the airing of Lucky Star's 4th episode, Kyoto Animation posted a brief and sudden announcement on their website, and I've translated it here. All their announcement said was this: "It has been determined by the company that the director of Lucky Star, Yamamoto Yutaka, was not yet fit for the position of director, and he has therefore been substituted out. With the broadcast of episode 5, the new director, Takemoto Yasuhiro, shall, together with the rest of the staff, continue production. Your continued support is appreciated." Nobody had any context for why this was happening. This is just, you had a couple of sentences they posted on the website, and Yamamoto Yutaka was fucking gone. And this announcement has become kind of infamous within the anime community. The specific phrase they use of like sonoza niwa sawashikunai, like not yet ready for, basically, has become kind of memed in the anime community because it is very funny. It was later confirmed by Yamamoto that he had not just been dropped as director of Lucky Star, but he was fired from Kyoto Animation as well. So this is, in terms of stuff we've covered, we have never seen something quite like this. The closest thing I can think of is Gundam Wing, where there was the original director of Gundam Wing who directed about the first half of that show, was also not really equipped to be able to direct that show, and the production became very messy, and he was quietly behind the scenes kind of shuffled out, and a new director brought in to finish out Gundam Wing, but it was not publicly said, and he was not fired. Well, he wasn't employed by Sunrise, because that's not how Sunrise works, but not that side of it. This is like, we are telling you he is not ready to be a director, and then also clearly it's not just he's not ready to be a director, he's not ready to be employed at KyoAni anymore because he is fucking gone, which is, that tells a much bigger story. If you're seen not to be fit for that role, it would make sense to be like, oh, maybe he just goes back to working as an episode director. It's a whole other step to just fire him from the company completely. So that's where a lot of sort of reading between the lines has to be done. So while there are no details as to the specifics behind his firing, it's likely because of his inability to fulfill the managerial role of a director, right? What a director is, particularly for a TV show, is you're fundamentally a manager of people. There is some evidence to indicate that he was inefficient as director and was causing a substantial amount of additional unnecessary work in holding up production, basically being too detail-oriented and getting fixated on stupid things that didn't matter and causing huge amounts of work to being redone over and over and over again. Additionally, while there are no direct allegations, I want to make it clear, there are no official allegations on record of this. There are lots and lots and lots of rumors of him committing workplace harassment, including sexual harassment, and his behavior post-KyoAni is going to lead a lot of credence to that, as you will see. There's it's not hard to believe that he was a piece of shit and probably sexually harassed some of the staff at KyoAni, which would obviously lead to him being fired from that company. So again, no official allegations, but probably. In 2007, Yamamoto founded the studio Ordet, O-R-D-E-T, and it was later joined by several KyoAni employees who left after Lucky Star finished production, probably most notably Yoshioka Shinobu, who I just talked about. He directed 4 episodes of Lucky Star. Satoshi Kadawaki, he directed 1 episode of Lucky Star, and then also Emi Kesumaru and Yoko Takeda, who are animation directors and stuff like that. So they joined him at Ordet and kind of poached them to a certain extent from KyoAni. Ordet worked as a subcontractor on several projects, most notably A1's Kannagi Crazy Shrine Maidens, which was a 2008 anime directed by Yamamoto. Kannagi Crazy Shrine Maidens is by far, it has a very kind of mediocre reputation. It's not sort of held in high regard. It is by far the best held thing he has done after leaving KyoAni is Kannagi Crazy Shrine Maidens. This is all downhill from here. In 2010, Ordet was acquired by the holding company Ultra Super Pictures, which also owns several other studios such as Studio Trigger and Sanjigen. Ordet created the Black Rock Shooter OVA, their first independent production, and in 2011, Yamamoto partnered again with A1 Pictures to make an original anime called Fractale. In the lead up to Fractale, Yamamoto declared that he had been ready to give up on anime, and an old man yelling at the cloud sort of way was anime is not like what it was when I was a kid. But that he was going to put it all on the line for his new original anime, Fractale, and he said in an interview promoting the show that, quote, if Fractale fires, he will have to retire from the industry. Fractale bombed hard. Fractale is a legendary bomb. It has terrible reviews. It is an absolute punching bag amongst the anime community, particularly in Japan. And the first volume of the DVD sold 883 copies. And that was the best-selling volume of the show, as is typical. So 883 copies, that is not a lot of copies. So Fractale did not succeed. But needless to say, Yamamoto is a lying piece of shit because he did not retire. And he does this thing multiple times, and I'll count up for you by the time we get to the end of this how many times he will have said and not followed through on his promise to leave once something he does is a terrible fucking cratering bomb.
Yeah. Have you ever seen Fractale, Sean?
No.
I have, actually. This is a case...
What?
When it was airing, I was writing... I think I was invited to write a little bit for an anime site that I don't even remember the name of the site, but I did some episodic reviews and a couple of DVD reviews. And this was something, I think I reviewed the first 4 episodes when they came out on this was pre-Crunchyroll, but there was some kind of simulcast. I think Funimation had it, and then it was out there. And it was completely incomprehensible. It's a very now to be clear, I've also learned in the years since, that's a Mario Okada show. That is,
yes.
Because she and Yutaka developed that story together. I was actually, I didn't know all the Yutaka stuff. So we've been talking about doing eventually a Mario Kata season, and you had not had this on the list, and I'm like, I don't remember it being that bad. But then we're talking about it here, and yeah, it's I just remember it being like very nice looking, but completely incomprehensible was my impression of it, again, 13 years ago when it aired.
Yes. Yeah, it would be something I'm curious to watch it, but, there's a lot of other stuff to watch.
I have the Blu-ray set because in a Right Stuff sale, it was on clearance for $5. And that is why I have that, because I was curious, but I have not gone back and watched it.
You chalk that up to 884. There you
go.
So here's where, now let's get into this little section here, Jonathan, to just give people a taste of how much of an asshole Yamamoto Yutaka is, because, we got some allegations that indicate some bad shit, but Yamamoto Yutaka, the big thing he is most infamous for is saying the absolutely stupidest, most rancid, terrible shit on Twitter and his blog. And he is just like, in Japan in particular, he is more known for being a shithead on Twitter than he is for being involved in anime, honestly, at this point. Like, if you type in Yamakan, like Injo, which means like to be flamed online, like for people like to be a controversy online, it's an endless reign of hits that date back fucking a decade plus. So there's a lot of material for you to do research on. I just pulled out a couple of juicy bits. Here's one of the earliest juicy, just terrible pieces of shit thing he said on Twitter. This is in 2012. Yamamoto had one of his most infamous sentences of him saying and stepping into some deep shit on Twitter. He made a response to a tweet made by the account for the absolutely legendary manga writer Koike Kazuo. He's the writer for Lone Wolf and Cub, amongst lots of other legendary works. Like, he's so deeply respected. And he's also like 80 years old, or he was at the time. I think he's passed away since then. So he obviously was not making himself the tweet. It was someone working for him that was tweeting something that they were saying that he said. It was something about to the effect how artists shouldn't have an attitude of, if you don't like it, don't read it. My work is only for the people who get it. So Koike Kazuo is like, you shouldn't like do that. If you have that attitude, your art's going to suck, basically, is like the read between the lines what he said. Important context, he wasn't tweeting this about Yamamoto Yutaka. I don't think Koike Kazuo had any idea who the fuck Yamamoto Yutaka was. He wasn't tweeting about this to anyone in particular. It was just a, observation about an attitude he had noted in some artists. Yamamoto, to that tweet, replied, "This is me translating this to the best of my ability. Some of it was kind of incomprehensible because it's a Twitter rant, but this is basically what he said. Are you really the kind of person who's left such an impact on the industry that you can say something like this? The guy who made fucking Lone Wolf and Cub? It really doesn't look that way to me. It's because of stuff like this that this industry has shred the barest minimum of pride, lol. If you're going to prattle about the customer is always right, then go ahead and let them fuck you. You want to set different rules to protect them, don't you? All you people? People who don't have any conviction or determination shouldn't wag their tail for society. It's always the same." He said this to Koike Kazuo, who is a 75-year-old man at the time. Koike Kazuo is in the Will Eisner Comic Book Hall of Fame with people like Jack Kirby and Osamu Tezuka. And he told him to get fucked. And honestly, the way I translated that is nicer than it comes across in Japanese. It's pretty fucking foul.
Yeah, that's horrible. That's really just, it's crazy. It's so crazy to think that this is a person who is partially responsible for the industry you work in existing.
Yes.
I think it would be fair to say that about someone of the generation of, Koike Kazuo. We talked about this. He's in the first issue of the same magazine Lupin III was published in. He and Monkey Punch started at the same time with their stories were publicized, published alongside each other. So we're talking about people of again, anime exists in part because of the contributions of this generation. What a dick. What a dick.
Yeah, if you're the guy who animated the dance in Haruhi, it's get in fucking line, dude. It's Jesus Christ. So yeah, that's just the taste. There's going to be some even worse shit he says later. In 2014, Yamamoto and Studio Ordette began their next project. Attempting to surf the wave of popularity generated by idol anime like Idolmaster and Love Live, Ordette created Wake Up Girls, an anime idol franchise which started in 2014 with a movie and 12-episode TV series, which was followed up by 2 additional movies in 2015. All of these were directed by Yamamoto. The series is generally a flop, although it is definitely better received than Fractale. with none of the movies generating more than 10 million yen, about 70,000 US dollars at the box office, and selling about 1,000 DVDs a pop. So a couple hundred more than Fractale per volume, but it's still not a hit by any stretch of imagination. The TV series did marginally better than the movies, and the live concerts, from what I read, were generally well liked. Though to be fair, that is because they had a lot of really good, who were people who were novice voice actors that now most of them are really big now. Probably the most notable being Aoyama Yoshino, who we would know now as playing Bocchi in Bocchi the Rock. And just put a pin in that, because that's going to come up again later in one of the stupidest fucking things Yamamoto Yutaka has ever said. In 2015, Yamamoto was removed from the board of Ultra Super Pictures. And in 2016, when a new season of Wake Up Girls was announced, Yamamoto mysteriously was no longer directing that show. On March 26, 2016, Yamamoto left Studio Det, but he almost certainly was pushed out. While no official reasons have been given for why Yamamoto was forced out of the company that he founded, to be clear, some insiders have alleged that the main reasons have to do with Yamamoto driving the company deeply into debt, which is going to come up because that was later proven to be true, and then him skipping out on much of the daily responsibilities of being a director, and him sexually harassing some of the voice actresses, who also, many of them would have been underage at the time that they were making Wake Up Girls. So, and this one I am very inclined to believe, because the driving the company into the debt thing, that later was proven true. And I found the source I found this for posted this information before any of that. They posted this in 2016. So if they got that right, I assume that the other things are accurate as well. And this was something that legitimately was an insider at the studio that was reporting this information. So, real fucking piece of shit. Basically, him skipping out on the responsibilities of the director is he just wouldn't show up sometimes, and he wouldn't kind of check the dailies and that kind of shit. It's just he would only show up every once in a while and wouldn't really do anything. It's just when you're already not actually successful and you're just not even doing your work, it's what the fuck are you doing? In 2017, Yamamoto launched a crowdfunding project, because that's where he was at this point in his life, that he had to go to a crowdfunding project, for an original anime film called Hakubo, which means Twilight. During the production of the film, Yamamoto's Twitter profile, as well as the Twitter profile for Studio Twilight, so the official Twitter profile for his new studio that he made, they were both suspended for abusive, threatening, and/or discriminatory behavior. So it's not just his personal account. The account he made to promote his movie, he was also posting so much bullshit on that it got fucking suspended from Twitter. This was shortly after a tweet where he said, and this is just the whole tweet, he just said, adults who watch anime are mentally disabled. He just said that. He just said that online. He's just no real context for that. He just kind of said it. So, he's a fucking cocksucker. He also, at this point, announced that he was planning to retire from animation after the release of Hakubo. This was, at this point, he had threatened to relieve anime 5 times, and he still hadn't done it. So, everyone was waiting for him to do it. And he's just I'm going to do it. And he still wasn't. The film was released in 2019. It was critically panned. It totally flopped. It made only 1.4 million yen, which is a couple of tens of thousands of dollars. Shortly after the release of the movie, Yamamoto filed for bankruptcy. It was when he filed for bankruptcy that it was officially revealed that he was in debt for over 100 million yen to the holding company Ultra Super Pictures for the funding they had given him on past animation projects, which some of that debt is what Studio Det was in. So, this is where you realize, oh shit, okay. So basically, because all of his money, his anime were flops, none of them were making any money. So all the money he was getting to try to produce them was just going into debt. So, real great guy here. In September 2019, 9 months after he said he would retire and 4 months after the release of Hakubo, Yamamoto, this is a whole fucking thing. Yamamoto announced another crowdfunding project for a dark fantasy magical girl anime called Magical Girls. This is in 2019, to be clear. Madoka Magica is from fucking 2010. So doing the, I'm going to do a dark magical girl thing, it's you're 9 years late to that trend. But there's a lot worse here. So part of his pitch for this series was that it was inspired by the Kyoto Animation arson attack, which is a thing that had only happened 3 months before he posted this fucking crowdfunding thing. A gesture in such poor taste that it's just, you can't fucking comprehend it. Notably, when Makoto Shinkai, the director Makoto Shinkai of Your Name and those kinds of movies, he tweeted shortly after the attack that just a simple tweet saying that he was praying for the safety of all the people at KyoAni.
Just a normal, nice thing you would do in the industry for your colleagues.
Yes.
Yeah,
just a totally normal, I hope everyone's safe, and finds, a way to be safe after this. And Yamamoto replied to that tweet telling him to shut up. That's it. He just said, Udasai, just shut up. He also made a blog post that if you can read Japanese, I don't recommend reading if you prize your own sanity, because it's just awful. He made a blog post that effectively was victim blaming KyoAni and implying that KyoAni was partially at fault for the arson attack because they had, quote, stoked the flames of madness in the anime industry, which is so fucking fucked up. It's just you can't really understand how someone could think that way, other than he's sort of so obsessed with his own victim complex after being fired from the company, 13 years earlier than this, for shit that he did that was obviously his fault. And then he has to make a post after one of the most tragic things that has happened in the industry ever, or probably the most tragic thing that's ever happened in the industry, blaming them for it. This guy can go fuck himself. I think this was the point at which I retitled the section "Get Fucked Yamamoto Yutaka."
Yeah, that's evil.
Yeah. It's evil. Mercifully, this Magical Girls project failed to meet its crowdfunding targets, and the project has been indefinitely stalled, and he has not made any new anime or managed to get any funding for anything since then. And it's been several years now, so I think it's probably... I don't think he made the choice to leave the anime industry, but I think the threat he was making to leave finally has come true because nobody wants him to make any anime. Also, mercifully, Yamamoto's new Twitter accounts and 2 of his blogs are currently suspended because of some of the other ridiculous shit he said. One thing that's amazing about this is these suspensions have occurred between the beginning of us recording Kyoto Vacation and the recording of this podcast. And really a couple weeks ago when I made this note, because when I started planning this season, I did my preliminary research on Yamamoto Yutaka. Those blogs and his Twitter account were still up. And thank God they're not anymore, because it limited the amount of his fucking puerile bullshit I had to read. So it's thank you, Twitter. And this is Elon Musk's fucking Twitter, dude. This is modern Twitter said enough's enough, and suspended his account again. But I feel like this isn't even enough to kind of fully give people context. So I put down here at the last section here just a sampling of some of the other awful shit he said, just to give people again, it's endless. This is just a sampling of all the terrible things he has said online and the reason for why everybody hates this guy. So there's a pop idol in Japan named Tomita Mayu, not to be mistaken with Tomita Miyu, the voice actress. This is a different person. This is several years ago, she was tragically stabbed by a fan. She's alive now, but at the time, it was a really horrible attack. She was stabbed by a fan multiple times. The fan claimed that he did it because she returned a gift that he sent to her, right? A classic kind of fan delusion for a parasocial relationship, right? She probably never even saw whatever this quote-unquote gift was. Her manager, it probably fucking bounced in the fucking post office or some shit. Yamamoto posted on his blog, and when he made this post, Tomita Mayu was still in the fucking hospital from these stabbings. He said, for people who work as idols in similar professions, carelessly blocking a fan is a bad idea, and you can't help how it looks when you return a present.
A piece of shit. Yeah.
Piece of shit. It's the most classic example of victim blaming. You could put this next to the fucking word victim blaming in the dictionary, this cocksucker. I already said this one, but he just had that quote where he just said that all adult otaku are mentally disabled. And the words he used for that in Japanese, I have mollified a little bit because I don't want to say it. He defended the anime New Life Plus after it was canceled due to the author having made racist and discriminatory comments about Chinese and Korean people. And that series also is about a Japanese officer in the Second Sino-Japanese War, which is not a... It's, it's a very classic, fascist Japan kind of thing that author was on about. And, Yamamoto Yutaka's whole take was why are you silencing him by not adapting his thing into an anime? It's that's not how it works. He harassed several of the Wake Up Girls voice actresses after he was removed from the Wake Up Girls project. Basically, they were in a thing where they sort of implied they were glad that he wasn't, or he read it as they were implying they were glad he was no longer involved with the project because it meant that there wouldn't be as many sort of upskirt shots basically in the anime. That isn't even really what they said. That's how he interpreted it. It was more just they liked the style of the anime more, and he kind of went down a weird rabbit hole about it, and he just harassed them endlessly on Twitter about it. And that's one of the times he got his Twitter account suspended. This one's really bad. In reply to an article about director Sion Sono, the Japanese director Sion Sono, who had sexually harassed and coerced a number of actresses in his movies into sleeping with him. This is during the Me Too movement. Yamamoto replied to a Yahoo News story. This is a Yahoo News story tweet just reporting this news that this guy, that this came out about this guy, that he had used his position to coerce actresses to sleep with them. Yamamoto replied, "Let alone the stars, I can't get with anybody. This anime director is sad, crying face emoji." he has been repeatedly vocally against the Me Too movement online, and the surprise to nobody. So,
well, I think the Me Too movement is against him. I think that's yes. The thing, is that it exists because of people like him. So there you go.
Yes. And then this last one isn't as morally offensive, but I also wanted to have an example of the kind of stupid things he posted online about anime, because he has the worst, most self-aggrandizing opinions on anime you have ever heard. And this is shortly after Bocchi the Rock came out. And he posted this series of tweets about it. And just look how, like, a very inflated opinion he has about himself. So he tweeted, K-On! And Bocchi the Rock share the similarity of both being about comedy generated from the main character while also emphasizing music and moe elements. These are successes won by the excellence of the lead voice actresses. But these successes are thin. In some ways, I am an originator of the slice of life anime, and I don't mean to criticize too much, but I never intended to create a work which abandoned drama. I also focus sufficiently on the drama in Lucky Star. If you don't get it, go watch some anime about a giant robot doing chambara. Is that drama? I have no idea what the fuck he means by that, but that's what he said. Okay, this tweet, for context for this last tweet in this thread, so Aoyama Yoshino, or Yopi as she's commonly referred to, is the voice actress who plays Bocchi. She got her start in Wake Up Girls. And then also for context for this, you have Toyosaki Aki is the lead voice actress from K-On!, and she is like a huge star in Japan. So he tweeted he worded this in this weird poetic way. I remember her gaze when she appealed to me. I want to make Wake Up Girls like the voice actor idol unit Sphere. Yopi, because of the morons around us, Wake Up Girls was disbanded, but you've grown to be able to walk shoulder to shoulder with Toyosaki Aki. I admire your unwavering spirit. It's like, who the fuck are you? Who the fuck do you think you are that you can be like, I like, the main comment I saw on this was someone saying, I can't believe this guy is actually doing the I raised her thing in real life, unironically, of looking at this actress that he probably sexually harassed while she was working on his fucking show, who has found tremendous success, and he's like, man, if other people could see how talented you were like I did, Wake Up Girls never would have failed. It's like, this fucking guy.
Yeah, I mean, considering the X factor there is she went on to have massive ongoing success, and he did not. I think maybe there's a discrepancy there, Mr. Yutaka. This is, what the fuck?
Yeah, and the fucking gall to tweet that you are the originator of the slice of life anime, when one, that's fucking Azumanga Daioh. Like, everybody knows it's Azumanga Daioh. That's not like a piece of trivia. It's massively popular in Japan. Everybody knows that. Two, everyone also knows you only directed were the director for 4 episodes of the fucking show, dude. Like, 4 of the 24 episodes. I don't think you get to say there and be like, well, I'm the one who made fucking Lucky Star. And then also this notion that, like, Lucky Star is a show that's dramatic, but Bocchi the Rock isn't. Like, what the fuck are you even talking about?
If you haven't seen
either of those shows?
Yeah, if you haven't seen Bocchi the Rock, that show is lighthearted, but it has a lot about social anxiety, and it's actually much more like serialized and kind of heavy than Lucky Star is. That's not a reference to either show's quality. I love both of these shows, but they're very different, like extremely different. So
it's like, hopefully that gives people a frame of reference for why. At the time, everyone was shocked when he was fired from KyoAni, and the fans were outraged by it. They're like, what is that? Like, how could you get rid of Yamakan? And now, everyone, if you look at any of the comment sections on any of these articles going back years now, it's just filled with people being like, man, KyoAni dodged a fucking bullet on that one. Like, holy shit. Like, the best thing KyoAni ever did was kicking this dude to the curb. Because holy shit, Yamamoto Yutaka is an absolute piece of shit, and he truly, can get fucked.
Yeah, he can. That's awful. I'm glad we're going to be able to bring ourselves back up here because we have a lot of fun stuff to talk about now with Lucky Star. But yes, it is a pretty rare thing to see one of these shows where an anime director is fired after 4 episodes. So I think it was good that we did a little investigating here. Boy, Sean, that was depressing.
Yeah, but I feel cleansed that I finally got to talk about it on the podcast, because I've had this shit rattling around in my head for like months at this point. I mean, it's kind of years to a certain extent, because I've known about this for a long time. But it's, this is, the greatest thing is we never have to talk about Yamamoto Yutaka ever again, because he never made anything relevant after for him being the director on 4 episodes of Lucky Star. That's where it peaked, and then he's gone forever. And so probably he will never make anything ever again, and it's fucking great. So anyways, that's the story of Yamamoto Yutaka. He can get fucked. You know what? It can't get fucked? Lucky Star, because it's really fucking good.
It's an amazing transition, Sean.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Japanimation Station. If you're enjoying the show, please remember to like and subscribe, leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and tell your friends.
You can support the show directly on Ko-fi at the link in the description, and remember to check out the Weekly Stuff podcast, our long-running series on movies and video games on all platforms.
And now, back to the show. So, can we talk about the show now? Just the show itself. Yes. And how it is good and pure?
Yes, let's talk about Lucky Star. I'm curious to hear your thoughts, Jonathan, because we've never really talked about slice of life. We've sort of talked about the structure of this, but what are your other kind of like general takes on Lucky Star, the show, and what you like about it?
Again, it's kind of funny for me to even talk about it in the slice of life thing, because again, obviously it is a part of it, but it is also so fucking weird. Like, I think this show I think it's really good, and I think my favorite thing about it is its sense of structure. I think both the kind of like wrapping the show is put in, where it is very elaborate, like package that each episode is, where you have your the theme song obviously is the same every week, but it is also the like most high energy hit you in the face theme song ever, the Moteke Sailor Fuku song and all of that. So you've got that. You get into the main episode. You have obviously your vignettes that kind of build on a theme and kind of spiral and eventually end up in unexpected places. And then, obviously, on the other end of the episode, you have Lucky Channel, which starts out looking like one thing and quickly goes off the fucking rails and is incredibly crazy and just one of the funniest things ever. I mean, that's the other thing, is that I think most of Lucky Star is not, and this is not a criticism, just the kind of comedy it's doing, is not often laugh out loud funny. There are specific moments, but it's often like you're vibing with it. And then Lucky Channel is you are going to die laughing because of what these two people are doing. And it's nuts. Lucky Channel will finally end, and then you will get the end theme, which is different in every single episode of the 24. Yep. The first 12 being the karaoke performances that they are doing, which is extremely funny. Basically just like a drama CD that they kind of like split up over 12 episodes is kind of what it is. I guess not drama, but a character CD or something. And then the last 12, they just give it over to Minoru Shiraishi, who is the MVP of this show, and let him do whatever the fuck he wants, I guess, for 12 live action segments. And then you have the next on preview, which are all these little like avant-garde things where they just have some clips from the next episode, and then the vocal layer is never at any point in any way related to telling you what the next episode is about, and gets increasingly weird and surreal. So, like, I think that overall package, and this is also why it was hard for me to watch more than one episode at a time at any point with this show, is that it really feels like kind of a whole experience. Episodes are the standard anime length of like 24 minutes, but they feel very dense, and like you get a lot of Lucky Star in every episode, both in the sort of rapid fire pace of the vignettes and the way it is structured, and kind of the quickness of the, speech and comedy and that kind of stuff. And then also you have all these other things that the show is sort of wrapped up in, and it is both the sort of warmth and familiarity of structure, but also that structure is built to surprise you every time, right? Mm-hmm. It's even when they start out with sort of like Lucky Channel has, Kagami Yoshimizu is an asshole who's constantly making the show about her. The joke like gets so much weirder than that so fast, right? Like they don't do the same thing every week. And so it is this sense of like both structure, repetition, but also variation that I think this show is really, really good at. And that's true in the overall macro structure I'm talking about. But then also the individual jokes and bits of comedy are so often about, let's come back to the same scenario, let's repeat scenarios, but let's do it in a surprising way as it kind of deepens and fleshes out over the course of the show. And that's the thing I really think this show is best at, is that structuring sense of itself.
Yeah, because I think like the sort of standard slice of life show is very kind of mild in its tone, very intentionally, right? And that's, and a lot of Lucky Star is, right? It's got this very kind of mild, like it's not trying to be very in your face. It's not trying to be very extreme. You kind of talked about it earlier, Jonathan, that like a lot of the comedy isn't supposed to be like knee slapping, like, oh my God, this is so funny. It's meant to get like elicit a little bit of a chuckle in a sense of like, yeah, I know someone like this. I've had a conversation like this. Like that's a funny observation about life. Like in Japanese, you have this term called an aru, which is a like, it literally means like a have, but it's like the things that like these common daily life things that people have that are kind of fun to talk about. Like the classic one would be in episode 1 of them talking about how you eat the chocolate cornet or whatever. Like, do you eat it from the top? Do you eat it from the bottom? Do you like, and all that kind of thing, right? These little like sort of daily life elements that are amusing but aren't hilarious. And that's kind of the majority of the content of the show, because that's like that slice of life element. But I think one of the things that makes Lucky Star really special is that around the edges, there is this insanity lurking, right? There's this like madness at the yes. edges of the show, whether it's the opening theme, which is kind of slightly bonkers, or it's the Lucky Channel segment at the end, or some of like the kind of more abstract or meta jokes that they will get into at certain points, or especially when they introduce like some of the more extreme things like anime tensho and stuff, which is just fucking bonkers. That stuff is there, and so you do sometimes move into this mode from that very mild taste to something that is so much more sort of explosive and spicy or whatever. And I think that contrast is very effective, and the show is very disciplined at it. And I think it's one of the things that I feel for the show, especially having rewatched it, is that's like something that I think the early episodes, like the first like 3 episodes or so, to me are kind of trying to figure that out. Like they're not quite there yet at figuring out, how do we pace this out? How much of the crazy do you put in there in some places? How much do you hold on one vignette? When do you cut? All that kind of stuff. I think the first 3 episodes are a little bit like iffy for me. I mean, they're good episodes, but they're not like, oh, this is Lucky Star. And about episode 4, 5, 6 is where it really kind of things snapped into place for me of, right, this is Lucky Star. This has this like perfect balance of, here's a bunch of quick little bits. Here's a larger vignette that's kind of chunked up, that's like themed around a bigger thing, like them visiting a summer festival or them going to the beach. And so you have like a series of vignettes that are interconnected. And then you have, that's where it also starts getting weirder. You've got like the beach episode in particular has some fucking weird, crazy shit. Like, Tsukasa, like like listening to the shell and then imagining herself just like floating in the ocean going, I have
yes.
nothing interesting to say. I am Tsukasa. I am Tsukasa. And you're just like, what the fuck is even happening?
So good.
It's around that point is where you start to, I think, really just get all those little pieces click into place. And it's a very fine balance. But from that point on, I think like it maintains that balance. Every single episode hits so hard.
Absolutely. And one thing that kept running through my mind watching this was, this so fucking nails the format of how to do your 4-panel comic strip adaptation.
Yes.
And make it work in motion. I would literally kill people to get an adaptation like this of Calvin and Hobbes, of like the American comic strip by Bill Watterson that will never be adapted because Bill Watterson, you will have to pry it from his cold dead hands. But if you could, like, I think if Bill Watterson could see, like, I don't think he probably watches anime, but if he could see something like Lucky Star or probably Azumanga or something that has like kind of cracked this format, I think he'd be like, oh, it could. It just could never happen in America. America would fuck this up really, really, really badly. But like, there is a certain, I could so see something like, because Calvin and Hobbes is the closest in spirit of an American comic I've read to this, in that it is both very mundane at times and it is completely batshit anarchic at other times, right? Because that's who that character is. And I could so see something like that, where you build the individual jokes could be vignettes, and then you have the larger story arcs that you could do whole episodes on. I think Peanuts you could also do this way. Peanuts has almost always been adapted as specials that are not based on the actual comic strips. They're just new stories kind of with the Charles Schultz characters. But like, Peanuts is less weird. You would make it more mundane. But I was just thinking like, man, there's a lot of American material that is never going to get the right adaptation because there's just no, like, I don't know who would make that in America. Like, no one is making this kind of show. But in Japan, you do have, I think, a space where you've got someone like Lucky Star has cracked the code. I think Isao Takahata with My Neighbors the Yamadas cracked how to do that there, which I mentioned before. And of course, I think Lucky Star gets it right because of, as you're saying, that mix. And I do think this mix exists in a lot of 4-panel strips in America and Japan, where you just get surreal sometimes. Because sometimes your joke, when it's a visual medium, I've read the first volume of the Lucky Star manga. I did not get to, and I don't know if it's from one of the Yonkama, it could be an invention of the Kyoto show, but like that joke you were talking about Tsukasa in the sea, and just like, I am Tsukasa. I can so imagine that in the 4-panel format where that's the last panel, right? Or the last panel is someone looking at her being weird. And like those kinds of jokes just open themselves up to this. And so, yeah, I think the mix of this kind of like rigorous structuring, fast pace, with a little bit of anarchy and chaos is such an interesting and like unique blend. They're kind of, both Lucky Star is influential to a bunch of other shows, and there's kind of no show like Lucky Star because it found a way to match its characters. Because the other thing it's doing is reflecting that its characters are weirdos because kids are fucking weirdos. And like, I think, Sean, you probably have an extra special connection to this being a high school teacher of just like, yeah, maybe they're normal like 80% of the time, and then 20% of the time they're fucking lunatics. And like there is something about that going on in Lucky Star of like, Konata is fine moving through the world and she gets her work done and she's fine. And then sometimes she's an absolute fucking lunatic in ways that like I can relate to, you know? And I remember, and then also there's probably kids out in the world being like her, like that right now. And it's really cool how it reflects that aspect of it.
Yeah, because it is that, like, that core, like, the really core slice of life side of the show is also just so well executed. That fundamentally comes down to the characters. Like, every character in the show is so well depicted, is so well likable, and feels like they really represent the kind of person that they're trying to represent, right? There's, like, good variety of characters that bounce off of each other really well. And I like that the show is particularly focused on just those main 4, and then kind of like, you know, Kuroi-sensei, Yuine, and stuff around the edges. You have a couple of the kind of supporting characters, but it's mostly your main 4 characters for that first half. And then the second half is where they bring in this kind of like Lucky Star, the younger generation, basically, right? Because as the main cast moves up a grade level, you then have this new set of characters that are in the year below them. And so you get this sort of mix up of, okay, now we're getting some new people at the midpoint of the season to keep things fresh. But all of them are still different and still like really unique personalities that bring something really new to the overall mixture of the show. And it is just about sort of like getting to know these characters and really like falling in love with them, right? That's the thing about the show that has that like moe element. Like this is a very moe show to me because these characters have this certain appeal to them where you're like, you just want to see them interact and be happy and bounce off each other. And it's like, you just kind of like want to like nurture these characters, right? Particularly for me, Tsukasa is my favorite. Like that's the character that like, she's so adorable, and it's like her like weird sort of, you know, she keeps on running into like weird scenarios where she accidentally left her cell phone in the washer and like shit like that, you know, and like broke her cell phone. But she always like bounces back from like whatever weird sad thing has happened to her. Like that character is just like this perfect, adorable little super relatable character. That is like, you know, I could see myself having a little Tsukasa figurine, and every time you look at it, you're like, yes. Like this is what life is. It's like, it's about like fucking up. It's about picking yourself back up, and it's like not caring. But you know, it's like the characters I feel like represent different kind of attitudes and personalities that you kind of really come to love and enjoy.
Yeah, absolutely. And the cast expands over time, so that second core is able to kind of keep it going. And then there's the other aspect of this that we haven't talked about yet, that this is like a show about the world of otaku media, and increasingly so. And I think if I have a criticism, I do think the second core probably goes on it a little too hard. I think it becomes a bit too much of the show at a point where I think at the expense of some other things that I like about the series, it kind of gets in the background. But obviously it leads from the front with Konata as our, like, clearly first among equals among the main cast. And then, of course, the author of the series being of this world, and all of that. And all of that is very funny. sometimes even when you're not getting the jokes, it's very funny. Like the Kamike episode where they go and do that. You don't need to really know anything about Kamike or Dojin to get why that is all funny. Although if you do, it is extra funny. And it is interesting. And I think it's academically interesting to me in a way that this might come into my dissertation a little bit, because Lucky Star is a really fascinating example of KyoAni making a show that is sort of about a part of the world they've helped to shape in their prior work, which is why one of the reasons why they bring Haruhi in so much. Like, it's really fascinating to see this crew, which this is mostly the Haruhi people, as we've talked about, coming back with a show that is not a sequel to Haruhi. It does not exist in the same world. It is not a technical follow-up. It looks completely different. Like, stylistically, this is by far the most different thing I think KyoAni probably has ever done, from looking at all their other stuff, too. Like, it looks really different than their other stuff, and up to now and in the future. But it is also kind of a sequel to Haruhi, because, like, the crater that show, like, left in the culture is so big that it becomes this thing that they are also clearly, through the show, working through the, like, boundaries of this thing that they unleashed into the world and what it has become. And I think that's also fascinating. Like, in a way that you did not originally have this in our plan for the KyoAni season, Sean. And I'm really glad you kind of revised it. And it was when we decided to break up Haruhi. And I think this was like a really cool way to watch it, of doing Haruhi season 1 and then this before we go back to Haruhi season 2, because I think it's kind of an essential context for understanding a lot of what this show is doing and where the headspace of the people making it must have been at.
Absolutely. Because there's this whole, like, really insane meta aspect to the show, because it goes so deep. Like, it goes so deep in that stuff. Where, like, I mean, you have the characters fucking go and visit the Kyoto Animation building, right?
Yes.
Where they go on the Kyoto School Festival. Like, they go visit the building. Like, Konata, who is voiced by Hirano Aya, the voice actress for Haruhi, loves Haruhi and goes and visits the Suzumiya Haruhi no Gekiso live performance at the beginning of one of the episodes. Like, it goes so deep with this shit.
The finale, episode 24, the events of the finale are precipitated by Konata being bribed with tickets to go meet Aya Hirano to do the whole cheerleading thing. It only happens, the finale, because she is bribed with tickets to go meet the actress who is voicing her in the show. Like, the levels of meta are a little bit like mind-fucking at points.
Yes, and, like, I love that all the main cast members of Haruhi show up in the show at different points, in, like, whether it's in Lucky Channel or in the main show. It is just, like, and then there's so much stuff, because there's also all, like, the Full Metal Panic stuff, which is, like, suffused throughout here. And obviously we didn't watch that show, but you can definitely, like, tell it's all over the place. Sorry, I love how much Sergeant Frog is in there. I've never seen Sergeant Frog, but I love it's like, it has no connection to anything other than it's a Kadokawa manga. So it's like, I guess they have the rights to be able to use it, but there's, like, Sergeant Frog is just all over the fucking place. Of course, you have all the different karaoke songs and stuff, some of which are meta in ways that they didn't know when they made it, because they sing fucking Chala Head Chala, and it is who is going to be Dende singing Chala Head Chala. Like, she's going to be Dende like a year or two later. It's like, it is the way in which it sort of is embedded in the otaku culture. It is about it, but is also influencing it, because it's still part of that. It's like, it's both commenting on and is fundamentally part of that same movement and shift in otaku culture that Haruhi is, because it's doing all the same things. It's got the same promotional strategy. It's having the same real world impact on the locations in which it's set. It's having the same real world impact in terms of the promotional material, like the radio show and the Lucky Star and Budokan, right? Like, it is both reflecting on and is participating in and is accelerating that culture in that style. And it does, like, there are times where it's like, it's such a sort of tangled web that has been woven that you can't really sort of, you're trying to sort of struggle to pull it all apart, and it can't, because there are too many entangled threads, and it feels like they don't even know exactly what it is they're making at a certain point. Like, what is it? Like, what is the joke? What is the reference? Like, what is going on here? It's like, it's so thick, you can't really process it all the time.
It feels like this is a pretty essential text for anyone who is trying to study or understand anime fandom in the 21st century, right?
Yes.
Like,
yeah,
I think this show is so much at this like weird epicenter point where you do just feel the people making it are kind of trying to understand and play with this bucking fucking bronco that is like anime fandom, and in a lot of different ways, where like it is reflecting on that. You know, there's something, you've mentioned it just earlier in this episode, so essential to the way anime fandom is both consumerist and generative, right? It is something that you consume and you buy stuff and you watch stuff and you play with stuff, but you also make stuff. You do drawings and you do doujin, and sometimes that doujin then becomes the actual thing that other people consume. And you know, make commentary and you play with your friends and you bring them into it, or you make fucking podcasts like we do, right? It is, you know, it is something that, like, in the current chapter I'm working on in my dissertation, I've kind of had to address this idea because I showed a little bit of it to someone and they were like, oh, this sounds like the theory of convergence theory in American media studies. And I'm like, right. And then I went back and looked at some of the convergence theory texts, which is like Henry Jenkins in the mid 2000s. And I'm like, this is so far behind the curve, not in a way that they were wrong. It's like, but it's like trying to describe America. And I'm like, this is trying to like scratch the surface of what anime has been since the like 80s and 90s. And it's just, it's a completely like different kind of beast that Lucky Star, through all of its different pieces, is clearly tackling. And you can, I think, very clearly feel in the show that becomes this sort of gravitational pull that pulls everyone working on it in, because it becomes heavier and heavier and heavier as it goes along towards the end, until you have like that second generation of girls who come in for the second core. Like, one of them is a doujin manga artist, and there's jokes about how she can't show everyone what she's got because it's, you know, because some of it is erotic. And like, all of these things, it just becomes more and more of the show. And I think that's fascinating. And I think it's like, it is still entertaining. And it is also, I think, this like vital cultural object from the year 2007 that feels like this thing made at a pretty crucial turning point in the history of the industry that is still like, it's both a funny show and weirdly kind of a like sociological history textbook.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's on that like point of it feeling like you can tell how the people making it are themselves experiencing and like trying to reflect on what all of this means. You've got the episode where, I think it's episode 15. Yes, at the very beginning of episode 15 is the one where Konata goes to, like, well, like, it doesn't tell you that this is exactly what it is, but through context you can figure it out. She goes to the Suzumiya Haruhi no Gekiso, which is the big live event we talked about with Suzumiya Haruhi, and she watches Hirano Aya singing the song God Knows on the stage. And she has this very emotional experience as she's walking home with her friends, and she can't put into words, like, what it is. Like, she's sort of, you know, literally kind of dumbstruck by this experience that seems like so emotionally moving, but almost kind of melancholic, of being like so close to whatever this thing is and like kind of touching it and then leaving. And one thing that's really fascinating is that episode takes place, like, if you look at the real world kind of calendar year in which the show is happening in, the episode takes place during the end of March into April 1st, because that's also the April Fool's episode. And the Suzumiya Haruhi no Gekiso in real life happened on March 18th. So it's like they're actually matching up the in-world calendar with the like sort of real world events that it is sometimes like interfacing with. And it is just so like, there's, I think, so much in that moment of seeing the character of Konata, who is voiced by Hirano Aya, watching Hirano Aya on stage singing the song God Knows. Hirano Aya is also like 21 years old or something. Like, she's super young still at this point. Like, she was 19, I think, when they started making Haruhi. And so, like, she's watching that and she leaves and can't define what it is that she watched or what the emotional experience she has just had is. And that's like part of what I think we're talking about, of like, there's so much happening there. There's so much to untangle in everything that is implied in that moment, because it is also like the people that make this show doing it as also, right? I think you can feel it's the people making it. It's like Takemoto Yasuhiro or Tako Noriko, who's the director of that episode, like looking at that moment and reflecting on, what the fuck have we done? Like what is this? Like, what is this world? Like, that they, because again, the Suzumiya Haruhi no Gekiso, it's not the first live event on an anime that was ever done, but it's one of the biggest at the time that it happened. Like, that thing was fucking huge. And it's like, this is only... That happened like 2 years into them starting to make their own independent animation, right? Airs in 2005. Lucky Star airs in 2007. Not a lot of real world time has passed, and they have been making anime the whole fucking time. So it is this sort of like sitting in the eye of the whirlwind moment of just like reflection and thinking about what is all of this in this like experience that we're sharing with this whole world, such a different world, this world like connected digitally through the internet that is still rooted in these like fan events like Comic and going to these places, this kind of like transitionary place between like the digital and the real and the fiction in the real 2D and 3D. And it's like, and there is no way to put words to it. There is no way to describe what that emotion feels like. But I think any fan who is watching the show can really, can really sort of like sympathize or empathize with whatever emotional experience Konata is feeling, even if you also can't put words to it.
Right. And again, I do think it is that sense of it happening in real time as you watch the show, because in the early episodes, you don't get a Haruhi reference until, I think, a major one until episode 4, which is where you get your great joke about Someday in the Rain, where Konata is procrastinating, watching TV, and being like, man, the people at KyoAni sure are cutting back with this Nagato shot. And it's so great. And you know exactly what it is if you've seen Haruhi. But like that's a pretty mild joke that feels like at that point kind of an outlier in-joke. And then it just accelerates and accelerates and accelerates. And like, well, why does it accelerate? Well, when they started making Lucky Star and they're drafting the early episodes, they're just making Lucky Star, right? And Haruhi is something they finished, and there's more going on in the background, but we're on the next thing. And by the time they're doing this, they've got their fucking concert coming up. And like Haruhi is this enduring thing that even though it's been off the air for a little while, it's still like going and going and going. And it is this thing that they keep circling back to. And because they happened to cast Aya Hirano in this role, I feel like there's almost like this kind of like, they can't look away. They can't like not make the jokes as they go further and further. And also because Aya Hirano is like such a unbelievable talent in these two shows. It's like you want to play this off and like think about this moment and have jokes about it. But yeah. And again, sometimes I do think it's to the detriment of the show in the later half. Like I do think some characters fall a little bit into the background in later episodes who don't have as natural a place in the otaku-dom of all of it. Like Miyuki is pretty light in the later episodes of the show, and I wish we got a little more with her here and there. And there's some where it's just like, I look back at some of the like relative sanity of some of the earlier episodes and I miss it a little bit here and there. But I also think like it's so valuable as a cultural object that this is not a huge problem for me with the show. It's more like I find it interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, because to give like some of this context, like the Suzumiya Haruhi no Gekiso would have happened like a week or two before episode 1 of Lucky Star aired, right? So it's like, as you're saying, when Lucky Star was starting production, like they knew that Haruhi was a big deal, but I think it like had not yet sunk in, because if you're someone who makes anime, right, you're creating whatever part of the episodes that you're working on, and then they go air on TV and it goes off into the world. And maybe you read some reviews, maybe you read message boards online and see the fan reactions. That's one thing. But you have to imagine how like transformative and otherworldly an experience it would have to be someone involved deeply in the production of something like that, and then to go to that live event and see an entire stadium filled with people who are cosplaying as the characters and doing the dance and all that, and they're like there in the room with you. It's the same thing with like Kamike, and like it's a different thing once it's like humanized and personal and it's right there. And so I think, as you say, it's something you can feel. The show is like processing it as the people are processing it. It becomes like even more deeply injected into the DNA of the series as it goes on. Yeah.
And of course it is also like very relatable in a whole lot of ways. It was like I have watched a lot of anime since coming back from Japan. I have not seen as many anime that show as many of the spaces that I spent a lot of time in Japan, which was like the manga shops and Book Off and Animate and all of these places where sometimes they're not naming the actual chain she's going to, although sometimes they are, but it's like clearly like this place that like I went to when I went there, and I wish I could go back because it was fucking otaku heaven. And of course that's what it is for Konata. Konata also just like is about as close to like this character feels quite a bit like me when I was in high school. In terms of a character I've seen in an anime, I was not a cute short girl, obviously, but like the sense of this character who is in school and she probably gets good grades and she does her stuff, but she doesn't give a shit about any of it. And all she's doing really is punching the clock until she can go home and play her games and do her manga stuff. And her head is like totally in the clouds with all this other stuff, and she's copying her friend's homework. Yeah, that was kind of me. Sean can tell you about the stuff I copied from him, and it's probably still mad at me about that. And yeah.
Yeah, well, it's like, what I love is the pairing of Konata and Kagami, who to me are like the two effectively like main leads. Like Tsukasa is like close, but I think like Kagami and Konata are clearly the two main characters that this series is most focused on. And they're such a fun pairing because they're opposites in so many ways, because you've got Konata as so kind of like lazy, and she's like so deep into the otaku world, and it's just like, it has like that kind of dominates her entire life. And then Kagami is, she's like very kind of proper and like is trying to do her best, and she's working really hard at school. And I think represents more of like what you'd think is the kind of like standard and kind of aspirational Japanese perspective on all of this stuff. But I think something that's really important is she really loves Full Metal Panic. But she loves the light novels, right? So she like reading all the light novels, all that kind of stuff. It's like she gets that world. Like she kind of touches it, and she has her little piece of it. She's got her little Full Metal Panic Fumofu doll in her room and all that kind of stuff. And she, like she likes that side of stuff, and she plays the games. There's that one really great episode where near the end where she is at one of her friends' house, that the two friends that are in her class, and she's playing games with them, and she's way better at the fighting games than that girl, because probably she spends all her time with Konata, and like she actually is a part of that world that just doesn't dominate her whole life. And I love that aspect. I like that it shows that there is also a kind of more normal way or something to be an otaku.
Yes.
That being an otaku doesn't mean it's everything that your entire life is. You can also be a Kagami, and you can be a huge fan of the Full Metal Panic light novels, and you can play these video games, and you can hang out with Konata. And I think that's like, it's cool to see a show represent that, because I think that is very much what it is like in real life. That for some people it's like everything. But other people, like, they still engage with the culture, but they've got other interests as well, and they're like doing other stuff. And I think that pairing and that way that those characters are both opposites, and yet they both are coming from the same place of sort of love for these things, is really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Through that, of course, you also get Konata's dad, who is now one of the great anime dads of all time. That also, I feel like you can trace the evolution of Lucky Star as a show through Konata's dad, who you don't even see on screen for a while. Like, there's an early episode, I think it's episode 7, because this was, again, I love that episode. I was putting down in my notes. One of the things I love is the little hints about Konata's dad. Like, they have all the stuff about cell phones, right? And there's a joke about dads calling daughters where, like, the Tsukasa and Kagami's dad calls both of them, even though they're twins who go to the same school. And it's cute. It's like, oh, the dad really cares. And then you have Konata note that, like, I never answer my phone. I think I left it at home. And then it cuts to just the back of Konata's dad at home calling and trying to reach his daughter, and he can't, and he's kind of freaking out. And you realize, like, oh man, this poor guy who's a single dad, we know at this point. And it's like, and Konata is his daughter. What a nightmare, this poor dude. And then as the show goes along, you realize, oh no, they are so weird. because she looks like her mother, but acts like her dad. She is like this perfect blend of the two of them. And her dad is every bit as much of a freak. And he's like fine with her playing all the eroge novels and all this stuff. And I love all that. I love how lived in that relationship feels. And then eventually, like, how big a part of the show he becomes. Because again, it's just this kind of gravitational pull towards that type of character, which results in the most touching episode of the show, the one about their mom, episode 22, which is really beautiful. But even if it didn't get there, it is still a fascinating evolution.
Yeah, it is just that whole side of the show where I love the detail of Konata doesn't use her cell phone. Like, it's another thing of where it's not what you'd expect, right? You think the assumption would be like, oh, she's an otaku, so she'd be a nerd about all the tech stuff also. But I like that there are all these little things that aren't exactly what you would expect. And this is, I think, part of like the moe thing, that it helps, like, you're trying to think through, character gaps and finding interesting contrast to build within your character is one of the ways that you develop a kind of moe character framework. And so Konata being a huge otaku, but she doesn't care about her cell phone, and also she doesn't like to read books, like she doesn't like to read light novels, I think is such a fun little detail that gives you this like richer sense of like kind of personality to her, that she's not just a like, we took a otaku cookie cutter and ran it into the dough and this is what came out of it. She's a much more specific person. And it's the same thing with her dad, right? Her dad is like kind of like a weird, creepy loser, you know, and he, you know, has such a kind of a very strange relationship with his daughter, but also like he does have kind of a good head on his shoulders in some ways. Like he's very self-aware of who he is, and I like how like that comes across. Like he knows the kind of person he is. He knows that it's very weird. He kind of can't help that it's how he is. Hey, it's, you know, it's how he's also supporting his family because he's a writer or whatever. It's it goes back doing his job. And there's a sense of like none of the characters are just stereotypes. And I think that's a real risk with these kinds of shows, is to just sort of say we need a very relatable stereotype, build a character in that model, and that's just who they are. And none of the characters in Lucky Star boil down in that kind of way.
Right, and it is part of what we've talked about before with this show, the sense of the little surrealism around the corners, but also the weirdness of some of the vignettes. Characters are often not who you expect them to be, and jokes go in directions you don't expect. And it is that kind of Kisho Tenketsu of the individual yonkamas and all of the vignettes that they do. It's kind of constantly coming back to that point. But yeah, the characters feel so real. It's a show that I just really love being in the world. It feels like a very fleshed out, real slice of reality that you are in. And it's fun to just kind of hang around and vibe with. Even episodes that I found maybe less funny or less rigidly, interestingly structured than other ones, maybe not rigidly, but like rigorously structured, I would still I like turning on this show and being in this world, you know? And if we didn't have the time constraints of doing this podcast, I probably would have watched it over a much longer length of time just to have it be a kind of thing to check in with every so often, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's how I remember watching it the first time. It was just like this very slow burn for me that maybe over the course of like, you know, a month and a half or something, I kind of picked my way through the show and really loved it.
Yeah. So what specific things do you want to drill down into here? We have a lot of directions with the characters and with Lucky Channel and with the fucking music and so many things here.
Let's break down the characters and talk about some like the vocal performances and stuff like that. I think that's a good way to hit at the core of the show, and then let's move from there to some of like Lucky Channel and some of like the other elements. So we've already obviously been talking about her, but it really needs to be emphasized how ridiculously fucking good Hiro no Aya is, and how just like mind-blowing a performance it is as Konata here, because like, you know, in your head, it's the same voice actress who played Haruhi and Suzumiya Haruhi, especially because we just watched it. It's like, you technically know that that's true, but like, you never feel it, and you have that insane episode where you go to her work where she's works at the cosplay cafe and she's dressed as Haruhi, and you have Hiro no Aya smoothly switching, like basically code switching between her Haruhi voice and her Konata voice, and it's like, it's the most impressive like voice actor magic trick ever, is like just that simple switching, and how much of a different person those two characters feel, and just like in obviously very like obvious ways, but in very subtle ways, everything about the performance, both of them, Haruhi and Konata, are such full, lived in, real feeling people. And they're also complete polar fucking opposites. And for this to be an actress who is, again, this is the very beginning of her career. She's in her, like, she's 20, 21 years old at this point, and she can, like, do that and do both those characters. It's like, what insane fucking talent that is.
I think she's even better here than she is in Haruhi. Like, I will just, at least for the season 1 stuff, you know, maybe I'll think differently later. I think this is a amazing performance. It is, like, it's the kind of voice that is just funny to listen to, because she has such comedy like drilled into the performance and the way of speaking, while also making Konata, who is a lunatic in so many ways, feel like a real person and an actual like human being in the world, who is like a weird kid in the way kids are sometimes weird. Like, the range of the performance kind of boggles my mind. Like, thinking of, I've seen most of her big roles that like you have listed here. This is my favorite of what I've seen her do, and that's saying something because she is so brilliant. But there is such a range of things she is asked to do over the course of this show, and she does them all so beautifully. And yeah, it is a absolute powerhouse performance.
Yeah, and it's fun because, Konata is definitely, I think, one of the most extreme character designs, and particularly in terms of her facial expressions. She's got that weird sort of, W-shaped mouth, and she often has her eyes kind of, disappear into lines and stuff. And so I think it asks her to do a very anime-esque voice for the character, but it just comes across as so natural. It's really impressive. But then we have some of our other mains. So we've got Miyuki, who's voiced by Endo Aya, whom we've seen in a bunch of stuff at this point. She's Yelan in Genshin Impact, which is a character I particularly like. She's in a bunch of Gundam stuff. She's Kinoue Crossroad, Saji's older sister, who meets a very unfortunate fate in 00 Gundam. She's Emily Asano, Flit's girlfriend, and then eventually wife in Gundam Age. She's Mirai Kamiki, Sakai's older sister in Gundam Build Fighters Try. And then we will also see her. She's Catalea in Violet Evergarden. That's one of the main characters in that show. The other roles people might have seen with her is Komegi in Hunter x Hunter and the Cheryl Gnome in Macross F. So very big voice actress. This is fairly early in her career. Miyuki is definitely, you kind of said earlier, she gets a little bit sort of lost in the shuffle a bit in the second half, at least in terms of you don't have a lot of stories focused on her as much, although you do get a lot more stuff with her and her mom in the second half, which is
it's great.
Those are some of my favorite jokes. But Miyuki, I think, is a great character in the sense of she starts off feeling like she is just what the joke is, right? Particularly if you read the manga and you just look at the first couple of chapters of the manga, the point of the character is that she is a generically moe character, right? She has larger breasts, she's got the glasses on, she's got the kind of very soft spoken voice, and she speaks in this kind of slightly heightened, very polite way. But the point being also that she's kind of clumsy, right? And so that is the classic moe thing of being normally perfect in every way and you're super smart and all that kind of stuff, but she does all these kind of clumsy things. And it starts off feeling like it's just supposed to be, this is generically moe character. And then slowly she just kind of without ever not being any of those things, that is what she is for the whole show. She really does just sort of I think naturally become that person, and it doesn't feel contrived. And there's some of my favorite legitimately moe things in the show happen with her. I think probably one of the most classically moe kind of things in the whole show is the bit where she is at the doctor's office with her book, and she sits down and is reading her book, and she doesn't hear her name get called.
Yes,
and so she finishes her book and closes it and goes kind of freaks out. And then it cuts to her being on the bus and she's sitting down with the book and she misses her stop. And she's and then she misses her stop 2 or 3 more times. And it is again, it's that sense of, okay, it's a little bit of your sort of standard moe setup of beautiful, super smart girl that's also very clumsy. But those things that she's doing feel very real. Her resistance to go to the dentist is so kind of funny and very relatable. And I feel like it gives context to that weird anime girl thing to make them feel rich and proper, where they kind of talk with their hand on their cheek. But for her, it feels like it's because she's probably always has a fucking toothache because she's never going to the fucking dentist. And I just think it's a really amazing magic trick as she shifts into this very lived in feeling person who still has all those kind of generically moe traits that she was set up with.
Yes, absolutely. I love Miyuki. I think it's exactly what you're talking about, and I think it's also why she gets lost in the shuffle a little bit in the second half, is she's so core to, I think, the good real slice of life part of the show in that kind of first half. And when she does have stuff in the second half, it is often absolute gold, because her stuff with her mom is amazing.
Yeah.
And then we have the Hiragi sisters.
Yes.
Yeah. Our
Hiragi sisters with Kagami, voiced by Emily Kato, who is Hachikuji in the Monogatari series, which is a huge role in that show. She's Kyubei in Madoka Magica. She's Becky Blackbell in Spy Family, which is a really good role there. And then she's also in Kobayashi-san's Maid Dragon for her other KyoAni role as Saikawa Biko in that show. And then you've got Kaori Fukuhara at Tsukasa Hiragi. She is also Kusaha in Chunibyo Demo Koi ga Shitai, which is a KyoAni show. She's Astrea in the Heaven's Lost Property series, Amai Kodomo and Saki, Hime Haruno and Achi Kochi, which is a very Lucky Star-esque show. And then one fun detail is the two of them together actually released a series of 3 albums from 2012 to 2016 as a duo called Kato Fuku. So they're twins in the show, and then in real life, I assume they're buddies because they kind of did that little project together. But yeah, these two characters are like, you could just make a show that's just about them. Like that's not even Lucky Star. Like, a big part of the show is like just the Hiragis and them and their house, and then you have their kind of extended family with the mom voiced by Kiko Inoue. Just to put that note out there, obviously you have an anime mom, yes. So you got to get Kiko Inoue in here. But yeah, I adore the Hiragi twins so fucking much. It is also insane how they are just Kyo and Yo from Clannad. Like, it's like they are just those characters again somehow. And I don't think it's meant to be intentional, because they also never make a reference to it. Obviously, Clannad as an anime hadn't come out yet, but the game would have been a thing. It is just Kyo and Yo. Here's the two twins that have purple hair. One of them has the long hair. It is kind of fiery and tsundere. One of them is like very soft-spoken and kind of the unfortunate one, and she's got the shorter hair. It's Kyo and Yo, but they're fucking so good.
They're so good. I love the dynamic that they are twins. They were born at the same time from the same womb, but they have this complete like older sister, little sister dynamic that is like so developed, even though it means nothing, right? It just means which one happened to come out first. But like, it's more sort of the way they act, right? Like, Kagami has the biggest big sister energy in the history of big sisters, and Tsukasa has the littlest little sister energy in the history of little sisters. And I love that whole dynamic. There's no weak link in this entire fucking cast, but man, do I love Fukuhara as Tsukasa. Just, it is, Kaori Fukuhara as Tsukasa is so fucking funny in every line delivery. It's just another voice that is just, like, naturally funny, because that character is so hilarious, so sweet. Obviously, I think, as you say, it's a kind of the moe side of it. And then Kagami, just absolute fire in everything she does, and I love all of that. And obviously, like, a lot of the show is Emiri Kato and Aya Hirano sort of verbally sparring, and that is so good. But Kagami is also, like, has the softer side with a lot of characters that is very funny as well.
Yeah, and Kagami also gets, like, anchors some of the more sort of, like, slightly emotional moments. You have that really great piece at kind of the midpoint of the show where, they're checking to see what classes they're going to be in, and she, once again, is in a different class than everybody else. And then later in the episode, you kind of realize, oh, the reason why is because they're sisters, and they don't want to match the two twins in the same class together. But it's like that little moment where Kagami, it's this sad little moment where she realizes she's the one left out again. And then they also use that as a transition point to introduce her two buddies that are in her class with her, which I think is also very funny, that like she just sort of sees them as like, she just doesn't really notice them and doesn't realize like, oh, I've had friends with me in my class the whole time. We just, because she hasn't been focused on them, we as the audience haven't really seen them yet. And I think it's like a great transition to introduce two new characters to the cast. But yeah, like that side of Kagami and the kind of more grounded emotional piece of her is also really, I think, important for the show.
Absolutely. Do you want to talk about some of the other characters sort of in the real world before we talk about the heroes of this show on Lucky Channel?
Yeah, so you've got, I think one thing that's interesting is a lot of the supporting characters are played by voice actors that are not, that are basically independent. So most voice actors, especially in anime in Japan, are represented by big talent agencies. But some of them, like Konami Maeda, who plays Kuroi-sensei, and then Saori Nishihara, who plays Yuine, both of them are independent voice actresses, although Saori Nishihara has her kind of own sort of like private company she's made called Saurio that, from what I understand, Konami Maeda kind of like gets cast through that as well. So neither of them are really like the anime voice actresses. The same is true for Yutaka's voice actress, Shizuka Hasegawa. She's not really an anime voice actress. Like, if you look up their credits in Japanese, you see a lot of commercials and stuff like that. I just kind of find it interesting because it's very rare to see that, but it's also not like, but you would never be able to tell. Like, they sound like anime voice actors. It's not the thing where, like, they're going for a very raw, non-anime performance like a Ghibli movie. It's just, like, kind of like an interesting side note. It's like they're not really, anime is not really their kind of main focus. But all of those characters, like Kuroi-sensei, I just sort of vibe with. on a very deep DNA level, because it's like the teacher with the nerds, and that's just like, and you know, she goes home to play her fucking MMORPG, and probably the most level of like, I feel this in my bones moment in the entire show is her coming back from the fucking field trip, and she goes to like turn on her MMO game, and then it's like, oh, there's server maintenance, and she's like, oh, and she just goes to bed just like defeated. Yes. It's like the most like, oh my god, yes. That's like when the fucking new Genshin update is happening. It's like, no, what do you mean I can't? Oh my god, what's happening? I just have to go to sleep. Oh shit.
I definitely thought about you a lot watching this character. I love her to death. There's the joke, I think it's when they go visit the shrine, and there's the joke about like single women past the age of 25, and then she's headed home and she buys a cake for herself, and then like gets really sad in the street, and you feel so bad for her. She's great though. She's awesome.
Yeah, it is just like seeing her sort of like trying to interface this relationship, particularly in the early episodes. You get a lot of stuff of her and Konata playing the game together, and her like try to interface this relationship of wanting to socialize with the student to a certain extent, but also having to be a teacher. And so she's like constantly nagging Konata in the game. Like obviously I think in the real world, you know, it's fine for the anime. In the real world, it would be very inappropriate, I think, to like play a game with a student like that. But it's just very funny, that like interaction where it's like Konata's just like, don't bring the real world shit into this game, Sensei, please stop. I love all of that. Then you have Yuine, who is also just a fucking ridiculous character. She has one of like the earliest really funny bits in the show, I think, is in episode 6, where she has this whole section where it's basically like a riff on Initial D, and and it like goes CG and like this like super detailed animation style as she's like drifting around curves and all that shit like that. Like, oh my god, that sequence is so fucking funny. And all the times of her just sort of like popping into Konata's room half drunk and just shooting the shit with her, it's really good.
I love how much that character pops up. I do think it's funny, the subtitles on the Funimation DVD, this is one of the only times I've seen Funimation slightly drop the ball on this kind of thing. And it's not even dropping the ball, but all of they call her Ne-san, right? It's Yuine and all of that. And they sort of just straight up always translate that as sister, which is what that means, but it's slightly misleading putting that in English, because she is not. And this confused me for a little while because I couldn't quite, they don't like sit you down and explain the relationship, because it is like important plot point or character point that Konata is an only child, and Yui is her cousin, and then Yutaka, who comes and stays with them, who they also refer to as sister, because this is just how people talk to each other in Japan. This is like a normal thing. But they're constantly throwing around the word sister, but then there are also episodes where they talk about Konata being an only child, and I did think like, the subtitles needed to find a different way to figure out how to translate what they mean by Ne-san, because it's weird. You will literally go from a sentence where it's like, my sister Yui, and then the next sentence in the subtitles will be like, but you're an only child. It's like, what are they, if you're just reading the subtitles, like I could figure it out because I know enough Japanese, but it is like extremely confusing on that level, which again, it's a tough thing to translate. I probably would have just almost like left it as an untranslated honorific, maybe, but like, which a lot of Funimation DVDs do, but this one didn't for whatever reason. So that was funny to me.
Yeah, that is very weird. But yeah, that character and her whole thing of where she's like a cop but doesn't, you know, give a shit. It's just like constantly drunk. The whole thing early on where you have Kuroi Sensei thinks that Yui is single and kind of alone like her, but like is just misunderstood, and it's just that her husband is often away or on work. And so Kuroi Sensei is just like constantly like, oh, you know, like us. It's like, oh, we're like single ladies, and then Yui's like, no, I actually no, it's just my husband's no, and then it's very good.
It's very good. I think as, again, like an unexpected character trait, just the idea that, and it's very lived in too, of like part of the reason she is this way is she's just lonely. She's at this weird point in her life where she's supposed to be like settling down with her husband, but her husband's overseas, and they're kind of waiting for all of that to like work itself out. And so she probably gets home at the end of the day and is like, I'm bored. I'm going to hang out with my cousin because she's a weird otaku girl and it's funny. And it's just hilarious. It's great.
Yeah, it's great. And then you get Yutaka, who is like, I thought this was interesting. When I went back to do some of my screenshots for my notes, and I looked at episode 14, which is one of the Kagami Yoshimizu ones. This is the episode where Yutaka is introduced. It's interesting when you look at how much that character like kind of is like sort of introduced as and is framed in the show as sort of the secondary protagonist, right? Like it almost feels like you could imagine that there's just a different Lucky Star manga that is just Yutaka and her friends.
Yeah.
And that's very much how that episode is sort of like introduced with how that character comes into Konata's life. But I do love Yutaka sort of like introducing or like coming into that world and being this like normal person who's very nice and well-meaning and can't think anything bad about anybody else, and like being next to all these absolute fucking weirdos, but she just thinks it's all fine. It's all fine. It's just normal. This is just how people are. It's okay.
Absolutely. I love her. There is an episode around that point that is basically just her and her friends. That is, I think, a very good one. And yeah, it really does feel like at that point in the second core, there is just a second show. There's like a spin-off to Lucky Star happening within Lucky Star that we sometimes intersect with. And I think that's an interesting choice that they make. But I like that character. I particularly like that character, though, because she brings with her Iwasaki Minami, who is obviously Nagato. It's Minori Chihara, who played Nagato in Haruhi, and is playing like, in my headcanon, is just also a robot, basically, because it's basically the same character, and they are off in their own little, like, girls love anime, and it's amazing.
Yeah, it's very good. I love that Minori Chihara plays Minami in this show. She plays Nagato Yuki in that one scene in the cosplay cafe where it's just Yuki and Kyon at a table and they're just having like a conversation from Haruhi somehow. And there is a very brief moment in the Kamike episode where it is Minori Chihara like signing things at one of the booths. So she plays herself, Yuki, and this new Minami character in the show. So she technically plays three characters in Lucky Star, which is pretty crazy. But yeah.
They had her around enough, I guess, when it came time to cast Iwasaki, they're just like, I'll just have her do it, and it's great. And I love how many shots it's usually Yutaka's friends imagining this, but it's also kind of just what's happening is they just see the two characters in a Yuri anime, and it's fucking hilarious.
Yeah, and I love the pairing because they're well paired because you've got Yutaka's like very short, she's got the kind of pinkish hair, and then Minami is very tall with the greenish hair. And it's very funny how many shots are like the two of them, and it's like Minami is like most of the frame, and then it's just Yutaka's head because she's so short that her body is cut off by the bottom of the frame, just like to accentuate the height difference between the two characters. It's really good. And then, of course, you've got Tamada Hiyori, played by Kaori Shimizu, who is the manga artist that is the one that's constantly using them for material for her Yuri manga. It's just being like, I can't do this. I can't look at my friends in this way. This is just wrong. I love that character. And there's one of my favorite jokes is the one, it's just a very brief joke, where Yutaka just runs up to her cheerfully in the class and just goes, "Hey, Tamada-san, what's yaoi?" And she's just like, it's like, oh God. And it's fucking great.
All of that is so good. Yeah, I like those characters a lot. There are so many here we could talk about. But one, I thought, the one thing like in the background of the show I wanted to mention there at the bottom of your list here is we've got the random male characters and the random female characters. Yes. And what they do with this, I really love, because they cast Fumihiko Tachiki as all the sort of random background men, and then Kujira as all the random background women. And we've actually talked about Kujira before on this show, because she's the mother of Mifune, the fortune teller, in Kara no Kyokai, the last movie, number 8.
Yes.
And we noted her performance there is awesome. I actually don't even know what pronouns Kujira uses.
It's she.
It's she. Okay.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's yes, but that character we talked about, she's on Naruto as Orochimaru, and then Fumihiko Tachiki, just for reference, is Gendo Ikari in Neon Genesis Evangelion. He is Sakazuki / Akainu, one of the like 2 or 3 big bads of One Piece. This is a person with a big voice, and the point is, Kujira has a very specific voice that you will never miss. You will always hear it's her, and Fumihiko Tachiki has a very specific voice that you will never miss. They are the 2 actors you normally would not cast as your random male and random female characters, right? You wouldn't normally populate the background of your show with voice actors who in no way blend in on any earth. But that's the joke, and I think that's so fun that like Kujiro does a lot of like the people on TV in the show. And so everyone on TV sounds like Kujiro. A lot of the like background kids sound like Kujiro, and a lot of the background kids sounds like Fumihiko Tachiki, neither of whom sound like children. They cannot convincingly sound like teenagers, but it's one of my favorite things. And then also, I like the way they're credited in the credits. They never just do random male characters. They list them all out every single time. So you will have like 8 credits an episode for Fumihiko Tachiki and 7 for Kujira, and it's very funny. But it's one of the like weird anarchic things this show does that makes it slightly surreal, is that everyone sounds like Kujira and Tachiki, who are weird voices.
Yes, and they're so recognizable voices, and they're so wildly inappropriate for any of the characters in the school. Like, when it's the random adults on TV or whatever, it's like, yeah, sure, that's fine. But then you do have, like, that one on the episode where they go on the Kyoto Vacation, appropriately enough. And Kagami, the guy, like, puts the thing in Kagami's bag, and they're like, hey, like meet me at the whatever at 9. And she thinks it's going to be like someone's going to confess their love to her. And she goes, and it's the whole thing is he's like, oh, could you give me that like charm you bought at that shop? It'd just be really embarrassing if I did it myself. But then that guy's fucking voice played Fumihiko Tachiki, which just makes it so much funnier because it's supposed to be like a 15-year-old high school kid, and it's just fucking Gendo Ikari from Neon Genesis Evangelion. It's so good. Yeah, I love it. It's just one of the most insane choices on the show, but it's amazing. And every episode, you're just like, you can never believe that they've done it, but it's so good.
It's so good. Do you want to talk about Mr. Anime Tensho?
Before Anime Tensho, I want to hit one of the other normal girls we haven't talked about, who's also one of my favorites. And we have to talk about her because she represents us, which is Patricia Martin.
Oh, of course, yes.
Voiced by Nozomi Sasaki, who is, if you've watched the Certain Magical Index series, she's the voice of all the Misaka clones. So if you look up her credits, it's like 1,000 credits because there's a lot of those Misaka clones. But yeah, Patricia Martin, who is just... I love this fucking character. I love at this point is where you start getting this character sometimes in anime, which is supposed to be us, right? The American who is like inappropriately obsessed with anime shit, who has ended up in Japan. And all of her stuff I find so funny, particularly her introduction in the Cosplay Cafe episode where she's the one who's cosplaying as Mikuru. And she has the punchline in that scene, which I love, which is sort of saying, Kagami's asked, like, so what's in this drink anyways? Oh, that's confidential information. And it's like,
yes,
motherfucking goddamn it. But all of Patricia Martin's stuff, particularly in the home stretch of her, like, she, like, kind of becomes slightly more insane, I guess, by the end of the show, where she's kind of gone so deep into it at a certain point that she can't find her way out of it. And she has a line where she just says, my ultimate mission is to absorb as much of this as I can to bring it back home to my country and share it with my people. I love it so much.
There's a really great joke. I think it's in the finale where Patricia, because she's the one who's like supposed to choreograph the big dance, and she hasn't done enough work for it yet. And they start like Kagami kind of lays into her, and she goes, "I'm sorry, my Japanese isn't good enough. I don't understand." And it's hilarious because we've had 24 episodes of watching her speak perfect Japanese, and Kagami's like, "You're fluent," and like lays into her even harder. And then someone else takes that joke as well, who has absolutely no excuse because they aren't a foreigner. It's so good. I love Patty-chan.
Yeah, Patricia Martin. It's also it's actually kind of sounds like an American person's name. They didn't like pull something insane. It's like an American person's name from like 50 years ago, but like, it's pretty close.
It could be a name in a David Lynch movie.
Exactly. Yes.
It couldn't be a name in like a modern like sitcom, but yeah, in Twin Peaks, sure, it could be a name.
But then we've got what is one of the most insane parts of the whole show, and this is like a whole thing to tease out like where this comes from, is you've got the Anime Tensho, or Anizawa Meito, which is technically the character's full name. This is, of course, the Tomokazu Seki character who just walked out of, like, Mobile Fighter G Gundam. Obviously, the character's designed off of Domon from G Gundam. He just looks like any of those kinds of characters that are sort of, like, hot-blooded, super passionate, and this, like, all that shit. So this character is not technically a Lucky Star character. He is actually a, like, promotional character for the store Animeto. So in the year 2000, they created this character because their rival company, Gamers, which is also featured in Lucky Star, they have a series of mascot characters called Digikara. which, just a weird side note, that is Miyuki Sawashira's first role. As she is in high school, she started playing a character in those cartoons. So that was her first thing, was playing the Petty-chan in Digikara. But because that brand had that character, they're like, oh, let's make our own mascot character. And so they created the Anime Tensho. Obviously, Anizawa Meito comes from Animeto. And they did a bunch of little like promotional shorts and stuff animated by Gainax, and that's where they cast Tomokazu Seki. There's like a promotional radio show and all this stuff. So Anizawa Meito, or the Anime Tensho, is a character that exists outside of Lucky Star. But this is, from the stuff that I'm familiar with, this is like by far the best use of this character. Like, all of his shit here is just unbelievable. This is my favorite stuff in the whole show in terms of the comedy. Anytime Anime Tensho shows up, it's just 11 out of 10. I find it's just the funniest shit in the world. The recurring bits of Legendary Girl A, Densetsu Shoujo A, which is Konata showing up to their store and them trying to find some way to get her to buy some shit, and they just could never do it. It's so funny, and this feels like it's basically the precursor to what we're going to see in Nichijou, because Nichijou is a lot like Lucky Star in some ways. It's just the fucking animation shit is just dialed to absolutely 11, and that's what the Anime Tensho stuff is. Like, you can feel they're spending like the animation time and budget of entire other anime shows on like a 3-minute sequence just with Anime Tensho, because there's so many frames and so much madness happening, and it's just the best shit in the world.
Well, because and we need to talk about the animation more in a little bit. Yeah. But one thing to know about the animation of Lucky Star, it's like vastly more minimalist than anything we've talked about this season so far. It is much more minimal. It has and like by intention. I don't think it's just that like they got a shitty budget or something. But there's large swaths of Lucky Star that don't even particularly have a lot of motion to begin with and are very simple in what is being drawn. And so it makes the moments where they go fucking full hog, crazy, KyoAni on something really notable. And the most notable of those are the Anime Tensho sequences where it's just like a little glimpse of like, what if KyoAni had drawn Dragon Ball Z or something? Yes. And it's absolutely wild. And you're right, it is hilarious. It's so funny. I love that Konata is completely oblivious to this and always winds up not buying anything, which is funny because most days she does. It's just Anime Tensho shows up on the rare days when she doesn't. It's fantastic.
Yeah, it's so good. And Tomokazu Seki just like puts 110%. He leaves it all on the fucking field, playing this character. There's one of my favorite bits with it is in episode 13. Is the one, I think it's the second Anime Tensho segment. And this is the one where he has his whole like cast of weird supporting characters. I assume that they're also from the other Anime Tensho stuff. One of them is voiced by Nakata Joji, which is fucking great.
I put that in my notes. Yeah, he shows up and I was like, is that Joji Nakata? And because it's an all-star ensemble. You get to the end credits and it's like a ton of big voices with Tomokazu Seki there. Yeah.
Yeah, and in that episode, they also do the next on preview as well, which is very good. But it's like him and his whole team, and they're like doing everything they can to try to like funnel Konata over to like the DVD section. It's this like huge segment. It ends with him like trying to use the fucking like code Gias I or whatever to like brainwash her into buying the DVDs. And then she comes up to the counter, puts the DVD down. She like has her money, and all the characters are sort of like, oh, and she's like putting like her yen coins down. And they're zooming in, their eyeballs get giant, and then eventually Konata realizes, oh, I'm like 10 yen short, and she grabs all of her stuff and just walks out, and they're just like left there, they're like, no, and there's just this scream that Tomokazu Seki lets out. It's just the most blood-curdling, just scream that goes for like 30 seconds. It's so good. You just can't believe how fucking intense they make these bits. It's the best. It's just the best. It's the best thing in the fucking world.
Yeah, I absolutely love it. All right, but now should we talk about the fucking actual stars of Lucky Star, Kogami Akira and Shiraishi Minoru?
Yes, the sordid tale of Lucky Channel. Oh my god, this fucking this is the thing that I have never seen any other show do something like this. It's so like weird conceptually, but it works so perfectly for the show of having like this like 2 to 3 minute long bit at the end of every single episode with these two characters that like technically Shiraishi Minato does, which is part of the running joke, is that he does show up in the show as like the random as Sebastian, as he gets dubbed by Konata in one of the episodes.
Which is not his actual name. She just starts calling him that because he looks like a butler, which is a great joke. It's one of my favorites.
And then you've got Kagami Akira, who's the super idol, who she's supposed to be like 14 years old, but of course, like all the jokes she makes it sound like she's from like the 80s, and she has her fucking Enka song and all that shit, which is great. And it's just such a bizarre segment, and it's so funny. And it starts out as just being like, this is like a funny bit that, like, this little like kind of back and forth with these two characters is like kind of over the top Kogami Akira character and the very bland Shiraishi Minato, who, he's playing himself. So it's like the way he voices the character is so naturalistic. It's just so well done that it just sounds like a person talking, which I love. And then Kogami Akira it's such a big performance that Hiromi Kondo gives there. And then slowly, as the show goes on, you get more and more of them. It just becomes more and more fucking unhinged. Like, there's that one point where Kogami Akira, this is one of the early ones that gets particularly weird, where so in the previous one, Shiraishi Minato won some contest where it's like, we want him to have twin tails on. And so he's there with twin tails, and that's the joke. And then the next one is she's there, and she's got twin drills, but it's literally drills like on a fucking mecha, and she's just there, and she's just stroking them. And for like the whole sequence, while Shiraishi Minato is talking his bullshit, she's just stroking her drill, just quietly going, do-do-do. Do-do-do, do-do-do, and she just does that over and over again for like the whole sequence. You're just like, this is just, they've lost their fucking marbles, and it's great.
And it gets weirder and more combative because Akira is a crazy person, and Shiraishi is a normal person driven to insanity over the course of the show. I gotta say, Hiromi Kono, it's my favorite performance in this show. I think she is unreal. The range between the big voice Akira puts on as the super idol, when she goes, "Ohayo Lakis," that whole thing, to the deep, mean, like nihilistic voice she has on when she leans back and has her hands, down in her sleeves and is just talking about how mad she is about the industry and at Shiraishi and all of her jealousies and everything. Like, the range between those two extremes and everything she does in between those, like, if you told me it was just two different people voicing the two sides of Akira, I would believe that. But it is one person going through all of it, also doing some singing here and there when she is briefly allowed to sing. All of the different jokes about the ways that Shiraishi has to, like, stroke her ego and everything are hilarious. One of my favorite jokes in the entire show is it's a 3-part gag between episodes 11 and 12, where in the lucky channel of episode 11, Akira promises that she's finally going to be in the show. She's like, because she's been complaining about it. Shiraishi has gotten to be there, and she's like, I'm finally going to be in the next one. And then episode 12 is when they go to Kamike, and they're going around and they're talking to everyone, and then she shows up. The character Kogami Akira is as a sign in the background of a shot, where it's like, clearly Akira was supposed to be here, but she's sick and couldn't come. And it's not even in the foreground. It's in the background of a shot. And while you have Konata and the girls like talking in the foreground, a passerby comes by and accidentally breaks the sign in half. And then you get to the end, the lucky channel of episode 12, and she is sick and has a mask on and can't talk. And she's super fucking angry. The like follow through on some of these jokes is unreal.
Yeah, and it is that, like, there's, like, these threads that, like, stick through different episodes. It is, there's just, like, this whole other show and a whole other plot line that's happening. And then, of course, you get in the second half of the show, they push it to these extremes where, you have, like, this kind of whole arc that finishes it out where she like convinces, like says like, I want to drink water, but I don't want to just drink any water. I want to drink the water of Mount Fuji. And then it's like they send fucking Shiraishi to
To be clear, you can get water from Mount Fuji at any fucking convenience store in Japan. That's just a thing. You can go get like bottled water. It's like getting Rocky Mountain spring water,
exactly.
Right? And so, and Shiraishi tells her this, and she's like, no, I want it from the spring, and makes him go.
Yeah, and so then there's a couple of episodes where he's gone, and then they get fucking Ono Daisuke comes on to replace him as the navigator, and it's this ridiculous comedy version of Ono Daisuke that just, like, takes his kind of pretty boy sort of, like, personality thing and, like, image, and just, like, exaggerates it, and that's where you get some of the most, like, sort of fucking deep-cut references, where they make these references to him and Hiromi Kono were both in Air together, because he was the main character, and she was the dog in Air, which if you go back to the podcast, I mentioned it briefly. It's like, this is going to come up again. And she's the dog. And so the first time they're on, it's like, oh, so you're not a crow this time? Oh, yeah, and you're not a dog this time either?
I was howling. I was like, this is so... You have to be so deep in the KyoAni lore to be getting this.
Well, and then in one of the next episode previews, it's just them doing the animal sounds that they did in Air. And he's just doing the crow noises, and she's just doing the dog noises, and there's just no context for it. And so what this the next episode preview thing is. And then you get fucking Shirai Shimino, who comes back like he's from fucking Castaway, and he's just like ripped to shit. He's got the bottled water. Kogami drinks it. It's disgusting. It's lukewarm. She throws it in his face, spits it out, and it's just like, it would be better if you just got this from the fucking convenience store. And then Shirai Shimino loses his shit. He fucking flips the table. He rips everything to pieces. The next one, it's just a fucking still shot of the set that's destroyed, and you just get Gendo Ikari in the background talking to himself, because it's just him doing both the voices of the producer of the show, just being like, what do we do? How do we deal with this? And then the piece de resistance, one of the funniest jokes in the whole show, is the Lucky Channel segment at the end of episode 23, where fucking Yuko Goto as Gotuza, it's such a deep joke, because this is the voice actress who plays Mikuru in Haruhi. If you remember, I mentioned on last week's episode that she is well known in the fan community for being this tough biker chick lady, and she got this nickname Gotuza-sama from Tomokazu Sugita, the voice actor who plays Kyon, to make fun of this, like, she seems very cute, but then actually she's this, like, tough badass who rides a motorcycle and wears, like, leather jackets and shit. And so Gotuza-sama, voiced by Yuko Goto, comes on and, like, just shouts at them like a fucking Yakuza person to, like, convince them it's like, you gotta get your shit together. Then she rides away on her motorcycle while she makes the motorcycle noises with her fucking mouth.
Yes, that's the piece there. That's the thing that ties it together, is her making the noises of the motorcycle. But yes, it is such a... My mind was so blown as we hit that, because it's like, this is the reason Lucky Star is a great show, but it's a hard show to recommend. You have to know the person, right? Because you can't just say like, oh, you like slice of life anime, you'll love Lucky Star. I don't think it's that safe. I think you have to have a little bit of a buy-in, and like, it's why the format we're talking about this in is perfect, because we've had a lot of build up to get to Lucky Star, and so you were able to lay the groundwork for Gotoza and all of that with it. But it's part of like how the show feels like it loses some of its marbles in a wonderful way, in a way I love down the home stretch, is Lucky Star episode 5 wouldn't make that fucking joke. Lucky Star episode 23 is built on those fucking jokes, and it's like both indulgent and amazing, because it is this like insular like celebration of like the anime voice acting community, but also a send up of idol culture and all this stuff. And yes, seeing I think it's kind of criminal we haven't gotten an actual anime about Gotoza-sama. Riding around on her motorcycle, always making the noises herself, and just telling people to get along, because it is amazing. Yeah, I feel like I love Lucky Star. Lucky Channel is like some kind of like weird god-tier avant-garde experiment, just running alongside this show that I love to absolute death.
It's so insane. And it's like, because I remembered it being really funny, but I didn't get some of the references the first time I watched it, because I wasn't that deep in. And like, when fucking Gotuza-sama shows up, you're like, what the fuck? Like, this is so deep down the fucking rabbit hole, but it's so kind of like earned it. You know, we've been on such an insane journey, and I just love, you know, the whole plot line that follows through on the Lucky Channel is just the best. It's so ridiculous.
And the Gotuza-sama joke, like, that's also in a roundabout way kind of a Haruhi thing, because that's where that comes from, is those two actors working together on Haruhi, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. That's where like it became known, was on the radio show for the promotion radio show for Haruhi, is where that joke started. So yes. And then for this, Yuko Goto was, up until that point, she was the only main voice actress from Haruhi who had not been on the show. Everyone else had done a guest show role, right? Sugita shows up in some of the Anime Tensho ones because there's just a character named Sugita who's just drawn to look like Sugita Tomokazu, who is there, and he's like on the Kamike episode, he is there opposite Anime Tensho, and there's a great bit where they are recommending, he is trying to sell a guy a Kyon Dojinshi, and then Anime Tensho is trying to sell him a Sosuke Dojinshi from Full Metal Panic because that character is played by Tomokazu Seki, and so they're both trying to like hawk this dojin for a character that they have played in a different anime, and it's another like sort of 5 layers deep joke. But yeah, so this Yuko Goto was the only one left, and then they've saved the best for last because hers is the funniest guest appearance of a Haruhi character in the whole show.
Yes, absolutely. And it's just, it's again, like, this is also where this show is just this fascinating, like, time capsule and reflection on the culture, because as you've mentioned before, most anime in this period and even on to today, the form has changed a little bit, but have radio shows or tie-ins or something like that. But they very rarely intersect with the body of the show in this way. Like, mostly they're kind of lost media in some sense. I mean, maybe they're archived, but they're not, like, relevant necessarily to the continuity or the action or the body of the show. And in this, it's like, it's because Haruhi has this radio show, and then it is because Lucky Channel is this offshoot radio show that then it becomes part of the show, and it all blossoms in Gotosa-sama, which is a character that exists because of these radio shows. It's so fucking amazing.
Yeah, it's absolutely bonkers.
Yeah. And I just love Akira. I think a lot of the best character animation in the entire series is Akira. You have some screenshots for us to look at, Sean, in episode 14, which is one of the Kagami episodes, or Kogami episodes, is her stuff at the end, like the character animation on her, the sheer exaggeration. Like, she really does look like almost more of like an American animated character in some of that, with just the rubberiness of her, and just the sheer amount of exaggeration they have on her. But it's always the case, like every episode, whoever draws her with, because her whole thing is she has her sleeves past her hands and she plays with them and then gets them off and then has her like normal hands, and it's all of that. The animation of it is so expressive and so funny. She is an amazing character.
Yeah, it's just, they have so much fun with all the crazy facial expressions on that character. And Kagami Yoshimizu is the one who has the most fun. His 3 episodes, if you look at the Lucky Channel segments for those, they're just like, the animation is fucking off the charts.
Yeah, it's what a great fucking animator. Oh my God. But yes, I just like literally I'm looking at some of these screenshots and it's like, this could be like a Charlie Brown sort of thing of him going like "Gah" or something, and it's Akira, and it's just I love it. Yeah, Lucky Channel absolutely rocks, and also breaks your brain a little bit to think about. I would love to be a fly on the wall for the conversations at KyoAni that resulted in this segment's creation and what it ultimately became, because my God, fucking weird.
And then, like, an extension of that is then you have the live action bits, right? So you've got the karaoke ending songs, which are awesome, and these like very funny little character pieces and super good in the first half. And it kind of, this sort of like represents the 2 halves of the show, because that's when the show is a little bit more traditional slice of life. The second half is where it starts to get more bonkers, and that's where you now have Shirai Shiminoru, and then you have Hiromi Kono is in some of them as well. I think Hirono Aya is the other woman who's in some of them. And it's him, and they're just on location out in the middle of fucking nowhere, as far as I can tell. And he is singing songs. From what I understand, it's either there are songs from the shows, right? So he does like Hare Hare Yukai in one of them, Moteke Sailor Uniform is in one of them. I think the other ones are ones he's just made up, and they sound like they're anime songs, but they're not, as far as I can tell, they're not credited to any other series. So he's just sort of like made up other songs that kind of sound like they would be songs from a show, and he sings them, and they're just edited together in these very fucking weird, surreal ways. There's one where after he's done like 6 or 7 of the songs, where it's like he's trying to sing them, and they're like blowing on a whistle, and every time they blow on the whistle, he has to move to the next song, and then eventually he just kind of gives up and keeps on resetting to the same song over and over again. It's just so fucking weird. It's the kind of thing you would think would happen on like a weird Adult Swim show from around this time in America, not on like an anime made by the people who made Haruhi or whatever, like these insane live action bits. But it's so good. It just really adds to the kind of texture of the lunacy of Lucky Star.
because it's also, they're shooting on like low quality standard definition DV from like the period, like I don't think they were using like an expensive camera. I think they went out to like their electronics store and bought something pretty cheap, and they're shooting on that, and it's like, it might just be Minoru Shiraishi and like the girls and maybe one other guy out on location. Like, it's a very small crew, clearly. I just love how DIY it is. I love how silly it is. The whole spirit of it is like so anarchic and weird. Just, I mean, at any time you get live action footage in an anime, always feels like some kind of weird boundary breaking that like is some kind of taboo that you're not supposed to cross. It feels like that when, Hideaki Anno does it in the closing episodes of Eva. It feels like it here, but here it's used for comedy. It's delightful. It's absolutely goofy. It is very, very, very rare to have an anime that does something different for every single end theme and keep you on your toes like this. And the way this show really keeps you on your toes is wild.
Yeah, and then that also obviously culminates in at the end of the OVA. They just have a live action Lucky Channel segment. They're just like, fuck it. Like, at this point, why would we do anything else? Of course, and now it exists in the real world with us.
I love, and the live action one, the best part about it is watching Hiromi Kono in the costume that they have tried to make a costume that is like Akira's really crazy long-sleeved one. And of course, in real life, it looks much more awkward and not nearly as fluid, and it looks a lot cheaper. But she is like giving it the old college try to make it work. And it is hilarious and awkward. And yeah, I also just love thinking about, Minoru Shiraishi, not technically one of the main characters of the series, obviously put in more work than any single voice actor in the show because he's everywhere. And he's had to go out and make videos and all this crazy shit.
Yeah, and he's like also co-hosting the promotional radio show and all that shit. Yeah, it's nuts how much shit he did for the show.
Oh man. Yeah. All right. I think we also should talk here, we mentioned it a little bit, the animation. Obviously something we've talked about with a lot of these shows. This is a anime podcast, obviously. But like Lucky Star is doing something pretty different. It is much more minimalist in both the amount of motion and then in the character designs. Some of this just comes from the manga. This is the kind of style in the manga. Although one praise I will give the show, having looked at the manga, I think the character designs are actually a fairly substantial improvement over what's in the manga.
Yeah,
I think they're quite a bit more interesting. They've added a lot more details to the eyes in particular, which I think help the characters out a lot. And they're a little looser. Like, as angular as the designs on Lucky Star are, they're even more angular and kind of digital looking in the manga for whatever reason. And I think here they just seem a little more fluid and kind of open. But yeah, it's fairly minimal. The backgrounds, which I adore. I think the backgrounds in Lucky Star are gorgeous because they're basically just sketches. They're often watercolors. They're colored pencils. They're not often fleshed out and filled in, and this is just a kind of art I really like, but a lot of it looks like more like what you would get as concept art, not finished backgrounds, and I think that looks really, really cool. And then again, I think they've chosen, a lot of it is fairly minimalist, and still, until you get to moments where they go crazy and you're like, right, this is a KyoAni show. Like in my beloved episode 7, there's a whole joke about Tsukasa and her cell phone, and they're asking her to like get a number, and then she goes through and it is this long cut of her texting and like trying to manipulate her phone, and she can't figure out what she's doing. And the amount of like detail and considered motion and like physics in everything she is doing using that phone made me howl with laughter. And part of that is it's like these leaps into motion where you will have a lot of minimalism, and then suddenly it'll be KyoAni's crack team comes out to play for a shot, and it's wild and silly. And that is usually how they have those moments manifesting.
Yeah, because most of the show is just, we have to have these characters sitting around a table and chatting. That's 80% or something of the content of Lucky Star, and it's great that that's like what it is. And obviously that doesn't demand much in terms of animating the characters. So that does mean that when you have the moments where you're not doing that and you have something that's more action focused, even if it's just action focused in terms of you have to be more expressive with the characters, it's just like you have to really like get into their faces. That's where the realization of, right, this is a KyoAni show that like really hits you. And it is one of the things I think sets Lucky Star apart from a lot of its peers, is that it is immaculately well animated, and then also it's just like the direction is often so incredibly good. Outside of the quality of the animation frames and stuff, there are lots of sequences that just have really interesting directorial touches. There's one of the episodes has this really great scene that it's them on the bus, and they're all talking about, like, it's just like a simple conversation they're having about oh god, what's the kotatsu, the like heated blanket or whatever in Japan, and they're on the bus talking, and it's like mostly filmed. I think this is episode 13, which is an Aratani Tomoe one, and a lot of that sequence is just looking at like their hands as they're warming them on the heaters that's like below the bus seats, and then them like shifting, and that feeling of like physicality and the kind of iciness of sitting on the bus. And then there's this like really striking shot of when the bus stops, they're still chatting, and then Kagami is standing up and she turns around and looks at them. And it's just like you get these little moments like that, of these little artful touches of animation. And it's things like the beginning of that episode where they go to the Suzumiya Haruhi no Gekiso, where you have these moments of just really thoughtful, really touching animation, really interesting storyboarding, that sets these sequences apart, that then is accompanied with just a higher level of like raw quality of animation and the number of frames and the fluidity that accompanies that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think also because this show is so still so much of the time, you really notice the storyboarding, the framing, and it is immaculate just as much as in Clannad or anything else we've watched. And, you know, just like the arrangement of characters on screen and the way they do, you know, leading lines when you have 4 characters on screen and they kind of are on an off-axis diagonal, and then that kind of mirrors something else in the image. I would just notice that a lot. It is absolutely immaculate. It is slightly unfortunate that because of the standard definition nature of the production, the official releases of the show don't look great. I'm looking at the screenshots you have, Sean, which I assume were taken from fans who maybe did their own crack at an upscale.
Yeah. I've sailed the high seas to find these.
Yes, because I talked about this last week, but like, for instance, the version we have here from Funimation is a DVD Blu-ray combo. The DVDs look totally fine. I would like they are just the native 480p versions, and they look totally fine. The Blu-ray looks terrible because A, it is an upscale that I think the upscale is also what's on Crunchyroll, and I think it's an awful upscale. Like, it just makes every line an absolute mess of jagged edges and stair-stepping and stuff that, like, some of that is there in the base artwork, but it's a bad upscale because it really exaggerates all that. And then the Blu-ray has some problems with interlacing. But yeah, like, they definitely could go back to this today. There is upscaling technology of all sorts that could upscale this much, much better officially. But it looks like, as often happens with anime, fans have gone and done that for themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so if you want to find a higher quality version online, it is not hard to find. Although the version I did have had very hilarious subtitles to me where, for whatever reason, this is like the most fan sub thing ever. They just decided not to translate the words Otosan or Okasan as dad and mom. So it's just left in the subtitles as Otosan. I'm like, that is the most unnecessary thing to not... That's not a Yui ne. That's understandable that you would translate that suffix. This is just the word for dad. That's a pretty easy word to translate. But outside of like some like amusing fan sub stuff, there's some very good versions you can find online if you want to get something that doesn't have the jaggies.
Yes, because it's both the time it was made and then the time it was upscaled. And upscaling technology is also quite a bit better now. But yeah, it is still a gorgeous show no matter what, particularly because of things like the framing and the storyboarding and all of that. And then again, when they decide to go crazy, when they decide to go ham on Akira in Lucky Channel, or when they decide to break out Anime Tensho or whatever you have, it gets real fucking good looking, and you're like, yep, this is Kyo Annie.
Yeah, or then on the other end, you've got episode 22, the Kanata episode, where you get the like, oh right, these are the people who make Clannad. They come out and you have this like one really touching moment, because you have a couple of episodes where you have these kind of slightly more emotional beats we talked about, like with Kagami not being in the same class with everybody else. But then you just have this one episode where you've had this little sort of subplot or like little element that's been in the background of the fact that Konata's mom passed away when she was very young. If you never really learned that much about it, but it kind of stands out as being a thing that like you wouldn't necessarily expect about a show like this. It's kind of sadder detail. And then you just get this one episode where the show moves into this sort of slightly fantastical tone where like the spirit of Kanata, the mom, sort of like comes back, and you have this really amazing sequence of It's showing like this field of flowers that I don't know what the flowers are. I assume they probably have a symbolic significance here. And Kanata's spirit kind of visits them, and you have the voice actress sort of narrating over this whole sequence of her watching Konata and the dad interact. Konata asks the dad, like, why did mom ever pick you? And the dad has this like moment of him flashing, and like the mom is thinking back to like how they met and all this stuff. He says that like the one thing he was confident in, he knew he was bad at all these other things, but he knew that there's nobody in this world that loved her more than he did. And then she has this moment where she flashes back through their whole relationship, up to the point of where it like implies that she dies of some sort of sickness after Konata's death or Konata's birth. And it's this very beautiful moment. And then they also but in a very Lucky Star way, it has a fantastic payoff of where the whole sequence is framed around her dad got this new camera that he's trying to take pictures with. So he's like, come on, let's take a picture. And so Konata's mom is like, as a spirit, is like, I'll get in too, with like this new family picture to replace the family picture that they have, the only one they have of all three of them together when Konata was a baby in the hospital. But of course, because she's a spirit, it shows up as this like weird phantom, like supernatural, like a weird shadows in the background, and they freak out. They're like, you gotta delete the picture. No, you can't, you gotta like burn it or something. You have to like have it exorcised. And the mom's like, no, don't burn it. And it's just it's such an amazing sequence where it really kind of takes the emotional texture of these characters that has always been there, it's just never been focused on, really brings it to the forefront, but it still feels natural because of the way that they frame it, because of the personalities of the characters involved, and because of that punchline at the end. It feels like it still fits within the world of Lucky Star, even though it is by far the biggest swing they take in terms of a sequence like that in the whole show.
Yeah, I think it's breathtaking. I think it is so amazing how they are able to transition out of your normal Lucky Star antics into this without it ever feeling like we're on a different show. It feels very true. There are very Lucky Star gags in there. The character of her dad has been so well laid out for us, who he is and what this relationship was, that it feels very organic. And then, as you say, it's a lot of like their stuff that they learned doing the Key shows that they're breaking out here as well. That sequence where you're in the field of flowers, and it's specifically what happens is like the wind rises, and then we kind of come back into the house and the spirit is there. And it's really lovely. And overall, I think the entire depiction of this family throughout this series, I really like. I like that it is, for most of the show, it's just a fact of life that her mom died. It's not that she is in unending daily agony over this, because it happened a long time ago. And that doesn't mean it's not sad anymore, but life does go on. And like even her dad, misses her mom a lot, but like he's okay. They're okay. He has his daughter. He's a really good dad. They're a good family. There is this, twinge of sadness to all of this, but they are alive and living, and it is not this, state of unending agony. This is like kind of an alternate version of, where maybe the characters in Clannad would have gone if things had ended a little differently, right? It's just there is this kind of like life goes on aspect to it that I think feels very true to Lucky Star of... This is a show that is focusing more on sort of the kind things in daily life instead of this, sadness that is gnawing away at you forever. And I think part of why this works in this scene is that even in this moment about the spirit coming back, it is focusing on kind of what was beautiful about this relationship and everything.
Yeah, and it does like sort of, because the core of the show is about depicting the lives of these normal people. And I think there's something nice about having something like this that is, it is normal, right? It's normal to have a family where one of the parents has passed away. Like that's not something that is that like uncommon of an experience for people, but it's not something that in a show like this would often be depicted in quite this way. And I like that, like, it's just sort of, it takes this moment to sort of reflect on it. And it's just this one moment to kind of like reflect on that, what that relationship was like. And you feel how important it is and how much that the spirit of the mother, like either literally or symbolically, depending on how you want to look at it, your kind of beliefs, but like how the spirit of that mother and that relationship lives on through these people that she left behind. And it's just like a beautiful moment to kind of reflect on that. And it still centers on the lives of these people. And it's not trying to make it overly dramatic. It's not trying to make it melodramatic. It feels very grounded and real.
Yeah, it's beautiful. two episodes at the very end I wanted to cue in on. One is the finale itself, episode 24, and then the OVA I wanted to give us a little chance to talk about. But that finale, I expected as I was watching it that they must have just gotten the mangaka to come in and write this, and that is what happened, as you told us, because it is fucking ingenious that you had this elaborate theme song that has become a cultural phenomenon for the whole season, and that the finale is just, how did that come to be? And it is the characters doing this cheerleading dance, which is what it is in the theme song from the beginning, basically. It's a little more heightened in the theme song version, and that's what this episode is about. And it is completely Lucky Star. It is not a tonal departure or anything. It's a slight, like, structural departure, but it is very funny and very cute and very sweet, and then it is also a little melancholy because it is also about how things end and how life moves on. And it kind of took me aback just how perfect that finale is.
Yeah, I think it's very touching because, there's something so appropriate about coming back to that opening, especially because, all throughout the show in that first half, before you have the second set of characters introduced, they're there in the opening theme. They don't do the thing that some anime do where, like, they add in characters as they're introduced to the opening theme when they become relevant. Like, that's not an uncommon practice. But here you've had, like, Patricia Martin and all of them, Yutaka, in that opening theme doing the cheerleader dance. You just didn't know who the fuck those characters were at first. And so it's cool to sort of, like, revisit that at the end and feel like you kind of come full circle back with, and this is how we arrived at this point. All these people together making this dance together. And there's a couple of things of, like, I love that the version of the dance you see in the finale is their rehearsal, not the real one, right? So it's like you get the build up to them doing the full actual performance as the curtain opens, but you don't actually see it. I think that's like a really smart way to play it out. So you did get to see the whole dance, but you don't get to see that one moment of them actually doing it in front of the audience. But then, you have that brief scene of Kagami as she is kind of like looking through the hallway and reflecting on, this is the last time they're going to stay this late after school, right? This is the last time they're going to do something like this. After this, they're going to take their college entrance exams and move on and do all that kind of stuff. And then, way later, eventually we'll be in Konata 31. That's going to be a whole other thing. But for right now, it's going to end. And it feels very appropriate for the show, the way that they frame everything like that. And I like that, as you come into that kind of home stretch, you get these last couple of episodes, like episode 22, that recenter some of the emotional stuff of the show again and kind of help you kind of come to terms with the fact that the show is ending.
The sequencing of shots at the end of episode 24, you have the great joke where Minoru Shiraishi comes out to introduce the gang, and then his cell phone goes off with the Minoru, that whole thing, and everyone's laughing about that. And as they compose themselves, the show recenters itself in the specific POV of our two leads, of Konata and Kagami, and it's centered on them as they look at everyone else, and we get final moments of everyone as they kind of compose themselves in the cheer line as our sort of goodbyes, but it's through their eyes, and then kind of the last shot of them proper is those two in the frame sharing kind of a knowing glance, and then getting ready, and then it is the curtain rising to white. Like, again, it's not a big tonal departure. It's not like they're clutching hands, desperately crying as they're ready. It doesn't become a different show, but it's really poignant, and it's really, like, good, subtle storyboarding and animation to kind of put us in the mindset of these characters as the note we leave off on is them doing their kind of final hurrah as silly high school students. And it's unexpectedly emotional. It's really good.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes you realize, like, how much you care about all these characters. It's very fantastic. But it's not quite really over, because a year later they did make an OVA, or what is called the original and visual to animation, or the original visual and animation, as you understand what that's supposed to mean at the very end with the live action section, because the original visual is live action Lucky Channel and the animation is everything else. But this is a double-length episode, effectively, that's an OVA that's mostly adapting other sections of the manga that never were originally adapted, though there are obviously there's a couple of original things, like the very ending of it. And then each section is directed by a different director. So the overall project is directed by Takemoto Yasuhiro, but each individual vignette has its own director, and they're kind of larger vignettes. And overall, I think like the OVA just is fantastic.
It's so good. My favorite part is Kagami's dream, which is so crazy. It's Kagami having this dream where it's basically an adaptation of Cinderella, and she's trying to get to the ball. Well, she doesn't even want to go to the ball, and Konata comes basically dressed as a witch, basically like Nagato in the Mikuru thing from Haruhi, and is doing all this stuff like making her house transport and all this stuff. And I was not surprised to see that segment was directed by Ishidate Taichi, the big man on campus over at KyoAni, because it is a phenomenal segment. My funniest experience watching this OVA, though, Sean, is the first chapter is about the dog Cherry.
Yes.
And it's a very cute little segment. It's basically from Cherry's POV. But I had spent the weekend dog sitting for my neighbor. So I have my dog Phoebe here. Phoebe's 8. Phoebe doesn't, when I have the TV on, Phoebe does not pay attention to it. She has never barked at anything on TV. But the other dog I was taking care of is a little dog named Tula. Just for reference, Phoebe is 65 pounds. She's a big dog. Tula is a Shih Tzu who's like 12 pounds. So they are very good friends, but it's a very funny friendship because they're very different sizes. But Tula is a little clingy because also, she was over at a new house, but she was in my lap. I turned on this OVA because I had to finish watching, and I didn't know a dog would react this way, but she sees the animated dog on screen and starts barking at it. Finally calmed down a couple scenes in, but then was watching with absolute rapt attention to the screen as long as Cherry the dog was on screen. And I found it absolutely fascinating. It's not even a particularly realistic... This is Lucky Star. It's all very caricatured. Tula could recognize that was a dog. Cherry doesn't even bark in the scene. But Tula was like, I'm keeping an eye on you, dog. And I thought that was very funny.
Yeah, especially because, Cherry's not going to do anything. Cherry's just chilling out. That's the whole point of the dog chapter, is just, hey, it's like Cherry's a cool dog that's just hanging out.
I love that Cherry takes the treat and goes and buries it in the backyard. Yes. And then the end of the short is him being kind of sick because of that, because he overindulged on treats. Oh, it's good.
Yeah, it's very good. I really love the Kagami's Dream chapter that you shouted out. One thing that is delightful about that is there is a brief moment where Dream Konata uses her magic wand and turns Kagami into fucking Tosaka from Fate Stay Night, which I was just like, Jesus Christ. It's like they knew. It's like they could see the fucking future to our podcast, because then after that, she turns into fucking Hatsune Miku. I'm like, what the hell is happening? Like, am I dreaming? Like, what the fuck is going on? Is she gonna turn to fucking Fujiko Mine next? Like, what's happening?
Does Type Moon publish through Kadokawa? Because there's a ton of Type Moon in this.
I think so, yes. Because, there's a lot of, if someone's reading a book in the background, it'll be like a Fate Stay Night magazine or something. Yeah, there's a lot of that. I'm pretty sure it's Kadokawa.
Yes, it is Kadokawa. I'm looking at it right now. But yes, that is, it's pretty consistent. And yes, that transition is so funny. And then her being fucking Hatsune Miku for the whole segment, I was just like, this is crazy. Sean, I know why Sean loves this show. This is... Well, now I know, but yes, it's very much for you and for me in that segment. Yeah, I'm just gonna say right now, that's my favorite Cinderella movie, is Kagami's Dream segment from this OVA. Best version of Cinderella.
Yeah, and then the punchline of that is so good, where she wakes up and in the dream, Konata told her some code, and she wakes up just like, I want to with Konata, and Scott is sitting there like, I'm not going to tell anybody. Just you sit right here while I go get my phone and I text Konata something. It's so good.
That's great. You have the whole MMO chapter where they are playing a game and they've done all this bespoke CG in the background, which is very funny.
Yeah, it's fun because you never got to see what the game was on the show, presumably because they didn't want to because it's a whole different pipeline to do the game graphics thing. And it's fun that you finally get to see it. You've got the volleyball chapter, which is a great little Hiragi little short story, right, about Tsukasa trying to stand up for herself against her sister.
It's great. It's got a brutal ending. Yes. Tsukasa losing anyway, but of course she's okay. It's the little sister, big sister energy. Again, though, I do have to say, It is very bizarre to me. KyoAni has never done a full-on like sports anime like this. I know they do have free. They have the swimming, and swimming is a sport, but it's not a sport with a ball. Like there's something about KyoAni is so good whenever they're doing volleyball or basketball or baseball. It feels like they want to do like the defining sports anime of the generation, and they haven't done it yet. Maybe one day. It just feels like they need to get there eventually.
Yeah, it is funny how much that has popped up in all the stuff we've watched so far. Then you have the camping chapter. This is the only thing in Lucky Star directed by Yamada Naoko. Obviously, this is like Yamada Naoko is just starting to direct stuff at this point because it's now 2008, so she's working on Clannad as well. And that one's fun. That's the most just like, oh, this just feels like a segment pulled straight out of the manga. Of all of them kind of wandering around and trying to figure out how to get back to camp. It's the most sort of like casual piece of the whole OVA.
What is Konada's ringtone when it finally rings? Does she also have Min Minoko?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, because Shiraishi Minoru, I'm pretty sure his was him singing it. I think it's him doing the Min Minodun and his name, not Mikuto.
That's why I'm getting it mixed up. Yeah.
Yeah. But then, of course, you have the piece de resistance, what I've called here the fucking insane pet shop chapter, or I've labeled my screenshot gallery Lucky Star's Gateway to Hell, because oh my god, this sequence is just fucking like, it's on such a different level than any of the weird shit in Lucky Star. It is, because it never resolves. Like, that's the thing that's insane about it. Like, the weird dream thing that Kagami has, like, well, the punchline is that it's a dream. This whole pet shop thing of where it's all the main characters go to a pet shop that's run by Minoru. The name of the pet shop is Pet Shop Super Minoru. And Shiraishi Minoru is the guy there. There's a weird, creepy black cat. There's all these just bizarre angles and very almost like German expressionist style, super harsh shadows. These weird shots of like the faces of the characters reflecting off of the metal bars of the cage in a way that doesn't even make sense, because that's not how light would have worked, because you're seeing the other side of the bar, but it doesn't matter. It's just like these duplicated images. And then you get them staring at Sergeant Frog, and I don't know the name of the character, but it's another character from Sergeant Frog, and they're there in a cage, and then they start just making their animal sounds, and then they start becoming these deformed, terrifying monster versions of themselves with big gnashing teeth, and then Konata wakes up, and you think, oh, she woke up. It's just a dream. But then it zooms out, and Konata's a little chibi frog character, and all the other characters are little chibi frogs, and they just say what species of frog they are, and then everything disappears into blackness. You get weird cartoon Shiraishi Minoru pops up on screen wearing like a circus ringmaster costume, and he starts singing one of his made-up songs, wa 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 wasure mono, which means like forgotten something, and then it just fades away. You're like, what the hell did I just watch? Like, it never comes back to normalcy. It's not actually a dream. I don't know what it is, but it's like one of the most intense directed things we have looked at so far. Like, this like makes the shit in like Neon Genesis Evangelion look fucking tame, man. It's nuts.
It's absolutely nuts. Although at the same time, if you told me Hideaki Anno came in and guest directed it, I would have maybe believed you. Because like a lot of it is fisheye lenses, like these intense wide angle lenses on the character, which is how you have the sort of distorted fishbowl effect. Anno loves using that in Eva and elsewhere, in his live action work too. You've got all the cutaways to silent film like intertitles, where dialogue is also in these silent film intertitles. There's, as you say, all the German expressionist lighting that they have going on. It gets weirder and weirder, obviously. And I mean, God, even the Anno connection, there's like a shot, I think this is Kagami like in like the water that's like kind of red. Honestly looks like something from the end of Evangelion, like at the end of that movie, of them like washing up on the shore. It is like weirdly apocalyptic and anarchic. It is just a full-on surreal avant-garde short film here at the end of Lucky Star. It might be the best thing in the whole show. It's definitely the weirdest thing, but it is amazing, and I love it. Overall, honestly, the OVA might be my favorite part of Lucky Star. It's such a goddamn buffet of amazing stuff.
Yeah, because, it's just like you really get to feel that they had like so much extra time to work on it, because it was actually delayed. Like they spent like a couple of extra months on it than from what its original release date was. My hope that delay was just, Takemoto Yasuhiro had a fucking nightmare. He's like, I gotta add something to the OVA. I know it's gonna push, like the budget's gonna be weird and we're gonna have to push back the release date, but trust it has to happen or my soul's gonna be consumed by Satan. Okay, it's like we just gotta do this.
I thought you were going to say the delay was him having to convince his colleagues. Like, no, guys, really, we've got to do this. Because it's fully committed. They don't do anything by half measures, and it is amazing. But every one of those segments is good, and it's just, like, honestly, they have not done any more Lucky Star since 2008. If they ever, I would love to see, like, more, like, hour-long, short films or OVAs or something, because I feel like, just, again, that anarchic experimental spirit that this show has is so fucking cool. And it being married to something as, on a ground level mundane as this is part of what makes it feel so special. Like, when Evangelion gets weird and avant-garde, that's one thing. Eva was always weird and heightened and in a apocalyptic world. Lucky Star is about kids at high school. That's like, all it is.
The first episode of Lucky Star has like 8 minutes of them just talking about different ways that they eat some of their favorite foods, Like, yes. It's the most sort of like mild, mundane, bland style slice of life you can have in so many places. And then you just have like, what if Sergeant Frog was made by fucking Junji Ito or some shit? You're like, what the fuck?
Yes. Oh my gosh. It's great. Do you want to finish, Sean, by maybe telling us about your favorite jokes? Because I know you made a list of this.
Yes, I have a list of my top 10. I really have a top 11 because I want to include my 11th on here as well because it's such a weird joke. My number 11 is balsamic vinegar. There's this very weird running joke where Tsukasa just really loves the word balsamic vinegar or balsamic sue, as you say it in Japanese. And she just will say it sometimes. It's the first text message she ever makes, which is probably my favorite one of the jokes because it's just her going, ba, do, se, mi, ku, su. And she like sends it, and it's just like the whole joke. I don't get what it is. I don't know why she likes balsamic vinegar, but it's very good. My number 10 joke is Akira throwing away the Fuji water, and everything that ensues in that Lucky Channel segment is just fucking madness. Number 9 is something we haven't talked about. My favorite karaoke scene is Konata trying to sing the theme to, I guess this was some drama version of Journey to the West. But the whole joke is that it has like a minute-long instrumental opening, so she can't find like when to start singing. And then once the lyrics come in, they're all in English. So she's just like, right, it's in English. Oh, I can't sing this. And it just cuts out. And it's so funny. My number 8 joke is Konata dissing Someday in the Rain, especially because there are so many layers to that joke that they couldn't have anticipated, because that's episode 4. So that's the last episode where Yamamoto Yutaka still is the director, and she specifically name drops. I mean, it gets bleeped out, but she's saying Yamamoto, and she's like, oh man, Yamamoto's getting flamed again online. And for that line to be in the episode that aired like 2 days before they announced that he wasn't going to be involved in the production anymore is just fucking crazy. It's a funny joke on its own, but with that context, it's great. Number 7 comes from the Kamike episode, which is probably the funniest single episode in the show to me. And this is Kagami looking at the Full Metal Panic BL doujin of Sosuke and the villain from that show. And they're like, you see the cover and they're like shirtless with like chains all over the place and like roses on the edges. And she like can't help but open it up. And she's just like, oh, I'm too young for this. Number 6 is Yuine driving in Initial D. We talked about that one. Number 5 is Tsukasa listening to her shell, which again is just one of the funniest jokes. It just zooming in on her and her just slowly saying, I have nothing interesting to say.
Yes.
I am Tsukasa. I am Tsukasa desu. Tsukasa desu. And then, of course, the payoff is that there's like a weird bug in the shell and she freaks the shit out. My number 4 is Gotuza-sama on Lucky Channel. We talked about that one. My number 3 is a weird one that I just said that stinks, but we haven't talked about this yet. One of the weirdest but most delightful running jokes in the whole show is that, like, more often than not, when they cut to a scene where characters are having a conversation that's going to be interrupted by a third character, that then is what the conversation is actually going to be about, right? So, like, it's like a random conversation that's not important that gets interrupted, and then the actual skit begins. most of the time, the characters are talking about something that stinks really bad, but they never say what it is. And it's just this running joke where every once in a while they're just like, oh man, that thing, it just really stinks. Oh yeah, that stink is just unbelievable. Hey guys, what's going on? And some character comes in and interrupts it. Or there's one where it's like, you know what? Sometimes it stinks so bad it comes all the way around to stinking good. Yeah, but only sometimes. And it's just this constant thing of like, and the best part is that they're always talking about it in this very like light, happy. It's like, oh man, that stench is just completely unfathomable, huh? I just like, what the fuck are these kids talking about? It is great. My number 2 joke is Konata at the cosplay cafe. Just everything in that sequence is fucking mind-bending. Especially I love Nagato Yuki and Kyon just at a table having a fucking conversation, which is so weird. And then my number 1 is anything with Anime Tensho. That's just like, Anime Tensho is the best. That's the funniest shit in the show. Probably my favorite is the weird joke of Anime Tensho and Suhita trying to sell their dojin for their respective characters to a different customer. It's either that or the one where Konata realizes she doesn't have enough money at the end to buy her thing. But those are my top 10 favorite gags of Lucky Star, and it's because this show is fucking nuts.
Yes. I did not make a top 10 list, but can I share another couple that we missed out on as we were talking?
Yes. Go ahead.
Episode 17 it's Konata's birthday, and they're all preparing for it. And the joke of the sequence is at the end, Konata like flakes out and doesn't come, which is funny in its own way. But the way that montage is done is it's a gag from the show 24,
yes.
with the Jack Bauer, Kiefer Sutherland show, and they bring in the 24 sound, like the clock coming down, and they do all the split screens. It's completely random. It has nothing to do with anything. They do use the 24 clock sound later on in a couple other scenes as well. It's so bizarre. Now, I do know 24 was popular in Japan. Like, it's a pretty popular show. Just like for reference, that show has never come out on Blu-ray in the United States other than the last couple seasons. It's all on Blu-ray in Japan. I found that out when I was there because it was prominently displayed at one of the stores I went to, and I thought it was funny. So it is a popular show there. So it's not completely inexplicable that 24 would be referenced. This is just the last place on Earth I expected it to be referenced.
Yes, yeah, I was shocked because, like, I haven't thought about 24 in a long time. And when they started doing that, like, it almost took me a second to realize what was happening. Because it's like, up to some, a dead part of my brain had to light back up again. It's like, right, fucking 24, Jesus Christ.
Yes. Okay. I some of these I just have lines and I don't know where they're from or the context, but there's a part where they're eating sweets and someone says, "This is the Haruhi dance of the sweets world." And I think that's hilarious. I think describing something as good by calling it the Haruhi dance of X is a great way to describe things. There's another gag on Lucky Channel where Akira they promise that she's gonna get a big show. She's finally gonna get to sing because they've been promising her. She hasn't gotten to do her idol shit. And so we get to it in the next episode and it's just a karaoke performance. And it's like at a shitty old rent karaoke place where it's none of the like high tech stuff you see in Japanese karaoke. It's like a fucking TV that's been wheeled into the room and all that stuff. And she sings her song while Shiraishi is like interfacing with the waiter and getting drinks. Just mwah, that's perfect. Because
that's where you get the Inca song, which is like said like on the Cape of 30 or something. It's like it very much sounds like someone who's 30 years old. Like it's like a midlife crisis style song. And then at the end of that episode, the sort of ending theme is a music video of the actress Hiromi Kono, like doing an Inca music video, doing the actual whole song. That one is very good.
I do not remember the context for this, but in episode 13, Kona goes, "Ugu," and it made me laugh extremely hard. Because, like, this would have been... They were making this, like, at the same time as Canon or something, right? So that's
basically.
Fucking great. That's great. What else? Okay, there's the scene where they go to the dessert buffet, which is a real thing in Japan. Japan is so much better than America. But they get there, and Kona says, buffet, the outskirts of a woman's desire. That is just one of the best sentences I've ever heard in any show. It's hilarious. I think someone should make a buffet and have the like on the entrance. That's like the sign under the name of the restaurant is the outskirts of a woman's desire. That's what a buffet is. That's
really good. I'm skimming through my notes. I've got a couple of other ones as well. In episode 10, is where you have there's a whole long bit in that episode about them talking about their different nicknames and stuff, because Tsukasa in particular has nicknames for everybody. And so Konata points at Shiraishi in the room and she just goes, so what would you call that thing? Basically, like she like refers to him as like a thing in Japanese. And Tsukasa looks at him for a second and goes, that doesn't really matter. And then Konata looks at him and is like, hey, Sebastian, do you want to get revenge? And he just goes, my name is Shiraishi. It's very good. And then that's also the episode where Konata starts calling Kagami Kagami-sama, and she just like gets incredibly embarrassed about it. And then the very end of that episode is where Shiraishi gives a huge, big, like 3-minute speech on like the origins of the term tsundere and how its meaning has changed over the years, yes. And how it's like it's all written to be like Giren Zabi from Gundam. There are lots of little Gundam references all over Lucky Star, but that one is specifically meant to be like him giving the speech after Garma's death and like rallying everybody. But it's all about like we gotta like take back the original definition of tsundere, and it's really good.
Yes, episode 8 has two things I want to point out. One is there's a joke where Konata has gotten into New Type, the magazine, like one of her little art submissions. And as they're opening the magazine and looking through it, she says, this is the one where Akira steps on Shiraishi, which is just a little reference to Lucky Channel. It's just so good. I love that sentence. That is also, you get the gag about the recorder. It's Tsukasa playing the recorder off tune and like getting out of breath. And it made me reflect. There is, I think, nothing funnier to me on planet Earth than an off-tune recorder performance. I don't think the recorder is a serious instrument. I don't think there's any serious way to use a recorder, because as soon as you play it even slightly wrong, it is a fucking comedy instrument. It's like a fucking kazoo. I love it, which is why it's part of the score of Spy Family. The show has a bunch of like off-tune recorders for anything that is like particularly silly. It's funny and it's great, and this just made me realize that, and I love it.
Yeah, it's really good. In episode 19, I was thinking of because I remember there was another big Gundam thing. And episode 19 is where Konata and her dad have a long conversation where all the Gundam specific terms are bleeped out. But it's basically this like weird conversation about her realizing that she's older than Amuro and she's only a couple of years away to be Captain Bright. And he's just like, well, Captain Bright had a real hard life. And they're just having this very weird conversation that would be very normal, but every single Gundam specific term is bleeped out.
Yes, I love all of that. And I love, just the sense of this lived-in thing of this is how this father and daughter relate to each other.
Yes.
Is talking about the anime that they show. Because I can just so imagine him, when she turned 8 or something, showing her Gundam for the first time, and she probably loved it, and this is how they bond, and it's very cute.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, we could talk all day, because this show fucking rocks, but I love Lucky Star.
It's absolutely phenomenal. It's just one of my favorite anime, particularly of this style. It just feels like a really kind of definitive genre of entry into this genre. And so obviously its influence is huge, but it also is an incredibly fun show to look back on to see what are the places where it's had influence, but then also what are the things that no show has been able to replicate about what Lucky Star did. And it's that anarchic madness in places is nothing else really kind of does it quite like this. You can have some kind of crazy shows, but there's nothing that is so twisted in on itself in this kind of pretzel-like way of where you kind of can't sort of tease out the otaku reference, meta fiction, that stuff. It's so thick that you can't sort of process it. I've never seen anything else quite nail that without it feeling like it's got its head up its ass. Whereas here, you never get that sense with Lucky Star. It always feels very sort of real to you.
Absolutely. And, again, everything I said about the way it kind of reflects and furthers the otaku takeover of the world around it through Haruhi and its interpolation of that material, it unlocked an idea for me that I'm still toying with, but might become actually a fairly major part of my dissertation and help me speed this thing along. So who the hell knows? Lucky Star might have a starring role over there as well, because it's not just funny, it's super interesting. It's genuinely academically interesting, not in a dry way, in a crazy way.
Yeah, because that's the stuff of when we were originally drafting out this season of the show, I had Lucky Star and I was really struggling over how would we do Haruhi, how do we do Lucky Star, how do I fit all that together? And then like, because I was like, Lucky Star is really good, but is it essential? And then when I started like really thinking about the show, I realized like, oh, there's more to it than just it's a fun slice of life show. And that was when it was like, okay, we gotta like do a deep dive. Like we have to break out Haruhi. We have to like go all the way in. And I feel very glad that I made that choice, because it feels so essential to everything that is happening here on such a big level that like it would have been tragic to have skipped Lucky Star.
Well, speaking of doing deep dives, do you want to tell the kids what we're doing next time?
Yes. So next time we are going back to Haruhi. Now that we've had our little break in Lucky Star Land, we are coming back to the world of the melancholy of Suzumiya Haruhi. We're going to be watching Suzumiya Haruhi again from the beginning, but with all of the season 2 episodes, quote unquote season 2 episodes, the 2009 episodes, or the fuck you want to refer to that. It's confusing. All the new episodes integrated in there. So this is basically, if you watch it on Crunchyroll or the Blu-rays, it's all the stuff in chronological order as it was aired in 2009. So we will be rewatching the original episodes with those. Obviously, if you don't feel like rewatching the original episodes and you want to just watch the new stuff, you can find which ones were not in the original run easily on Wikipedia to help your watch order. But I would recommend watching all the old stuff again, because a lot of it is going to be really heavily recontextualized by a lot of the new information you're going to get in the new episodes, and watching it in that different order I think is very interesting. So I am very excited to get into that. There is some, like, we're talking about, hey, there's some insane stuff in Lucky Star. We're going to talk about legitimately the most ridiculous thing that has ever been done in the history of anime. Like, by, I think, a healthy margin, what we're going to talk about next time is the most bonkers thing any anime company has ever decided to do. So look forward to that next time on Japanimation Station's Kyoto Vacation. Bye me!